In this video, you're going to learn how to build the most maintainable, scalable, performant, and consistent website using Webstudio. To accomplish this, together we are going to build a landing page using the best practices, CSS variables, tokens, animations. I'm not holding anything back. I'm going over everything, and I'm doing it in a very unscripted way so you can see the decisions I make, why I'm doing one thing over another, or doubling back on a decision and, redoing something because I found a better way to do it. These are the real ins and outs of building a website. Now we're going to be building this landing page. I'll show it to you in a moment. It is by designer Koa, aka Jack, and he has this out there on Figma. It's a SaaS landing page. Here's what it looks like. We're building the light mode here, and surprise, at the end, I show you how to change just 6 values on the website, and you're able to achieve this dark mode right here. All right, light mode, we're building all of this, and I'm going to give you a sneak peek. This is actually, I just got done building it. This is what we ended up building on Webstudio. There's still a little bit more tuning that could be done, but all in all, this has come together really well. We have dynamic components in here like tabs, allowing you to switch between them, change out the content. We have animations, so as these scroll into view, they're fading in. And we have accordions with animations too, so they're nice and smooth. Also, on the navigation, we took some time to build this out where the wrapper of the navigation expands and contracts nicely, and it comes in and out with a little zoom effect too. And even the little details, when you're hovering over this, the main navigation link stays hovered with the chevron pointed up. After I made the video, I came out here and I laid out the general steps, the rough steps that I follow to build this site. We're not going to be revisiting these because I jump around a lot to tackle whatever the biggest thing I want to work on at that time is. But generally speaking, we first talk about craft, the standard guideline for Webstudio, and we'll start with the default style guide in craft. Then we work on defining the global library of colors, setting our default font size, things of that nature. After we do the global library, we start building our components like buttons, links, cards, accordions, and until we kind of get bored of that and it's like, okay, let's just start building the website and build any remaining components that we still need to create. And we do that on the homepage, assembling section by section. It's a little mundane to spend all the time up front defining that global library, defining the components, but all of that upfront effort pays massive dividends down the line because we breeze through the homepage. I mean, it is super quick. After we do the homepage, tackle the footer, and then do the header. After we have it looking good on desktop, we do mobile. You might think that this is going to be a lengthy process, but I'm going to show you my tricks that make mobile optimizations take like 5 minutes, probably less than that. And finally, I'll show you how to change just 6 variables so your entire theme switches from light to dark or dark to light, and it kind of reinforces all of the different variables we create up front and why they're important. Oh, and just one more note, prerequisites. Make sure you watch the Webstudio 101 series. They're just a handful of like 1 to 3 minute videos that are going to cover concepts that I'm not going to re-explain in this series. Enjoy, and I hope you learn a lot. Here we have a brand new Webstudio project. The first thing I'm going to do is head over to the marketplace, pages, and insert craft. Craft is the standard way of building on Webstudio. It's completely optional, but it contains a lot of preset CSS variables, tokens, and then there's naming conventions so that we can standardize on the same way of building sites. So that way, if we share projects or components with one another, they'll adapt seamlessly with our projects and not clutter our own tokens or CSS variables. So it contains open props, which is an expertly crafted library of CSS variables. And this has basically everything: colors, gradient, shadows, sizing, a lot of very useful CSS variables. There's also documentation on craft here for things like naming conventions, but we'll be going over this in the video. So I'm going to insert the style guide. It contains open props plus an actual style guide. So we've got our different colors and our, topography and stuff like that. And that's going to be it for inserting craft. Now we need to customize this to match our landing page. So here's our landing page. We're going to be building out this light mode here. And at the end, if we do everything correctly, I'll show you how easy it is to switch the theme. And so we can invert it and make it dark mode. I like to start by first looking over the Figma template and just understanding everything that's in here. Specifically, let's start by getting the colors over to Webstudio. So we're going to put a lot of work in up front, setting up the style guide. And it's a little bit mundane, but it's super important because the more work we do up front, the faster we'll build when it comes to the homepage and other pages, and the more maintainable our site will be. So I see that we have these different colors on the side, and I'm going to get these migrated over to Webstudio. I need to map them to the different CSS variables that we have. So it looks like we have primarily a grays and blues. And let's get these mapped over. So, by the way, I'm the Webstudio Pro. Figma, there's probably a lot of people in here that might see me doing something a little bit like there's a better way to do it. And I believe that there is. I'm not a pro with Figma. But let's get these colors mapped over. So we have our neutral and then our primary. Easy enough. I'm going to pull open Sublime Text here and just put these in a text editor so I'm able to keep track of them. And I'm going to map them to my variables in OpenProps. So I'll show you what I'm doing right now. If I go over to OpenProps and head over to colors, there are all of these preset colors. So I'm going to map the grays to the grays here, and then the blues to the blue. I like to pick the primary or the main name color. So if there's only one blue, I'm going to choose blue. I'm not going to do indigo or cyan. I think it's just easier to look at a blue and say, we're going to be referencing blues, but that's kind of a personal preference. All right, so we're going to map these to our grays. So I'm going to do the gray 0. And here I'm actually going to copy them out of here just so it's a little bit easier to just copy and paste. Okay, so that first one was all white. Okay, I've got 0 through 10 mapped. The library comes with 12. We don't have 12. So I'm just going to type unset for these ones so they're not accidentally referenced and, the colors aren't actually in our theme. Okay, so now I've got those. I'm going to do the blues next, the primary. And I'm going to head back over to OpenProps and just look for my blues and copy these out. And let's get these switched over using the Figma colors. Now these only have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sometimes what I'll do is leave a little room in the front or back of them. So like if this is 200, I'm going to leave this one empty and this one empty, just so if we decide later we want to add a lighter or darker color, we're able to do that. All right, so we've got 200. And then again, we don't have colors for these, so I'm just going to unset them. And that way these default colors aren't going to be in my style guide. Okay, so I think those are all the colors. We've got our neutrals, our primaries, and that should be good enough for now. Next thing I'm going to do before we import these into Webstudio is head down to colors. And there's a list right here of some additional variables outside of OpenProps. So these are part of Craft, custom for Craft. And these specifically are to map the various color palette colors to more semantic variable names. So that way, if we ever decide to change what our foreground primary is or whatever, we only have to change it here. Okay, so foreground primary, this is where we're going to start looking at Figma and mapping these colors. Now the foreground primary, what I'm going to do is set that to be what this color is. This is going to be like the body color. I like to make it the body color because we'll set this on the global root. I know it's just a lot of me talking right now and not actually doing anything yet, but it'll make more sense once we're in Webstudio. So this is the 800 for neutral. So I'm going to go over here and say my foreground primary is my variable 800 on neutral. So that's gray 8. And I'm going to map this to there. You could totally do this directly in Webstudio. I just think it's a little easier to work within a text file right now, but you can work wherever. Okay, the background secondary, or foreground secondary rather. If we look at this page, and I'm going to say this is our foreground secondary is going to be our header, which is the neutral 1000, which is the darkest one. So I just need to make sure I grab this 10 here and say that's going to be our foreground secondary. And then the foreground accent, if I look around here, do I see some sort of accent color? It really is the blue, but I don't know. Yeah, I guess we have some blue right here. So the accent color is going to be the primary 600. So let's grab our blue 600 and say this is our accent color. And that is also going to be, actually we'll wait on that. Okay, foreground muted is actually going to be this, the primary color here. And the border, let's see what we have border wise. Stroke 400 here. So we'll go over and grab our gray 4. Okay, good. Background primary. What's the primary color on our page? I believe it is white. Let's head up to the top and make sure we are at our gray 0. Secondary, where do we see this? Maybe a slightly darker color. I see the blue. To me, that's more of an accent color than secondary. So until I run into the need for it, I'm going to just say secondary is unset. And then background accent is going to be the same as our foreground accent for this. So I'm actually just going to reference this variable. And lastly, what's the background of our card? These are just white as well. So I can either do gray 0 directly in here or reference my background primary. Doesn't really matter because it's going to be super easy to change. Okay, I know this was a lot of prep work, but we're now going to go into Webstudio. I'm going to copy these and head over to Webstudio and go up to my global root. This is where all of our variables are defined, our global variables, and we can see all of the open prop ones here. So there's going to be our greens and our cyans and indigos and like all the colors we were looking at are grays. So these are already defined, but we just want to update them to be our own values. Same thing with background card, accent, all these good ones. So what I'm going to do is go to the plus and paste these in. And now they are using the color theme of the Figma file. You could have easily just went in here and said, okay, I'm going to make my background primary, gray 0, or my foreground, all that, and update the colors too. I just find it a little easier to work in a text editor, but feel free to just go directly in the advanced panel here and update the variables. And we'll see that our style guide is adapted to use our colors. Okay, now that we have our colors in there, I'm going to look at some of the other like global defaults. What do we have for, fonts, for example? We've got DM Sans. So let me go and find DM Sans, download this, and they have a variable, which is great. That means it'll just be one file, and that'll handle all of the different weights. And it's only 134 kilobytes. So this will be great for performance. So I'll go up to my global root because I want this to apply everywhere. Head over to the fonts and upload this one. There we go. We've got our global font updated. We can do sizes as well. I honestly like to wait to do sizes just until everything's kind of put together and then be able to tweak it. So you'll find that I bounce around a bit. I just try to get it like mostly there before we do the next thing and then go back and tweak anything that needs to be tweaked. So we've got our colors and all that good stuff in there. Let's start building out some of the individual components. So I'm starting with the colors, the basic building blocks. I've heard them called or been referred to as atoms before, and then we can do the things that those colors make up and the sizes, molecules, so like our buttons, our different components. All right, so let's take note of the different buttons that we have. We've got our primary button, our secondary button. They have an icon optionally in there. There's this button. This is like, I guess, a tertiary button, just like a third option. That's secondary. So we've got 3 buttons. Let's get at least 2 of them created right now, or they're already created. Let's get our styles in there. So here we have our button token already in there, good to go. Let's figure out what our default button styles should look like. We have a bit of a radius on there. The radius we have right now is a little too much, so I'm going to head down to the radius field and update this to be my radius 3, and we can always adjust these later. Like I was saying, we could fine tune it and get it dialed in exactly how we want it. And we've got a background, and I'm going to include a border just because some of the buttons do have borders, so if we didn't have a border on this one, it wouldn't align with that. So we're going to do a border, which is already there, border size 1. And I'm just going to say this is our foreground accent, so it's the same right now. And for our color, I need it to be inverted. So we're going to go, so I actually don't have a white color right here. That was an oversight in creating these. So let's go back to our CSS variables. It doesn't matter if you're using the text file or the advanced panel, and see what we have here. So we have our primary color and our secondary color, and muted was the same. So I'm going to switch these up and say my foreground primary will be that darker color. The secondary will be our gray 0. And we'll see how this works. And then we'll just set foreground muted on the global root. So let's do that now. Let's get these colors in there, go up to the global root and paste them in. So these will update them. And I kind of want this default typography color to be the muted color. And on this button, now we should have the variable for the foreground secondary. Cool. A lot of this is, I mean, you're kind of seeing the process of moving things around until they feel right, as Bogdan, the engineer at Webstudio, has said, you know, just move things around until they feel right. So that's what we're doing. So we've got our button, and I think that's looking okay. Maybe a little bit more. Let's make this semi-bold. And I'm not going to do hover animations until later. Let's just kind of get the default state set up. And then we've got our secondary button here. Oh, I don't know if that was an accident, but this one has a blue border and this one doesn't. We'll just assume it was an accident. Oh, no, we won't. A little inconsistent here. This one has a dark border or light border, dark text. This is the accent color. We're just going to choose one of them just for consistency and say this is our secondary button. So let's go over to our secondary, and I want the border to be, I think, the border color here. And then the foreground to be foreground muted. Let's try that. Okay, so we've got our 2 buttons right there. And I know there is that third one, but I'm just trying to get like the big stuff built out. So let's move over to our links. I usually like to have one base link token and then modify it for the different links. So let's take a look at links we have. We've got our, oh, you know what? I forgot about the icon. Let me go back and let's add an icon to our button. We're just going to add it to our base button here, just to show that it can be done. And then I'm going to rename this Command E to icon. I like to rename HTML embeds so it's clear on like what it contains. Paste this in there. Usually icons, you just need to click that fix automatically. And I also like to change the width and height to 100%. And then the fill, if there's more than one, change them all to current color. And this will allow us to control the height, the width, and the color from the style panel. And let's create a token for these, and we'll say that this is button icon. And we'll set this to inline flex. And that's because contents, if it doesn't, it ignores basically the style panel. That's a CSS feature, but in this case, we want to use these. And let's try setting this to 1M, and this is just going to be a relative unit to be basically equal to whatever the font size is on the button. And on the button, we're going to set to inline flex, so we have this axis we can work with, and set everything to be the middle, and you'll see that the icon is moving up and down, and we just want that to be in the middle. And let's add a default gap. So there are these preset gaps here. We've got extra small, small, medium, and large. You could just use sizes as well. Size dash here, all of these, but the gaps are just an alias or semantic CSS variable, so we can always just reference these 4 and stay consistent, and then use the sizes for anywhere that these 4 don't work. Okay, so we've got our button there. The cool thing about this is if we remove the button, then it still works just fine. So the default button token has styles to work with icons if it exists. And I'm just going to move this to the second one. Okay, now let's do links and figure out what we have on the page. We've got our nav links here. We've got this like secondary nav, which are lighter. These are links. These are just blue links. And our footer, which looks to be the same as the nav. And then we have links with icons. So now I try to figure out how can we put as many styles into the base link token and then create little modification tokens. So like we've got our link and then like is link with icon or something like that. So what's our default? What's going to be the default state? I like to think of the default state as the one that has a link within like rich text. So if I were to link this text right here, what should this link be? And they don't have any in the design, but I'm just going to plan for the future of like when we have a blog and stuff. Now they have this color, but the problem with having a link that doesn't have like an underline is that people with visual impairment can't tell that if this was a link right here, for example, they wouldn't be able to tell it's a link just because the color is different. You know, if they're colorblind or whatever, then it looks the same. So you would have to have the contrast ratio between the text color and the link color be significant enough that it passes accessibility guidelines. And we can check this to see, okay, we've got this link color. Let's plug that into our link color. And then the body text color is it's actually the muted color, so it's whatever like this color is here. And then background was white. So we could see that the body to link text fails. So this right here is what I was talking about. If you are colorblind or visually impaired, you're not going to be able to tell boxing wizards as a link, but if there's an underline, then it's obvious. So I typically like to include the underline because you're not only trying to balance the contrast ratio of this text to this text, but you also have to balance all of the text to the background. So you have to keep these three contrast ratios in check. So it often feels like solving a Rubik's Cube. So I'm going to go a little off script here and say, yes, this is our link color, but we're also going to have our default link have an underline so it passes accessibility. So if we go back down to our link, it actually already has our foreground accent color in there, so it just automatically adapted. And I'm just going to explicitly check underline just so it's there. When it's gray styles, that means that the browser default is setting these. Blue means we've overridden it here. Orange means that it's set somewhere else. So if I hover over here, I can see it's set on the global root, on local, and the base breakpoint. So global root, local, right here, and then the base breakpoint. And we can see, I think it was font family we were just looking at, is set there. Okay. So we've got just some basic defaults right now for our link. Let's create some variations. So we've got our navigation link. I'm going to call this is link nav. And in the tokens, that's going to be the name of the token, is link nav. So this naming convention is used to create variants of the base token. So whenever you see is as a token prefix, it means it's meant to be a modifier of whatever the base is. So you would never want to use is link nav by itself because it's depending on styles from link. So the naming convention is dash the base name, so link nav. There's no like functional thing behind this. It's just a naming convention. We could just call this, link nav, but the problem is we would never know that you have to always use link with this token. So is link nav, always use link as the base, and then is link nav after it. And now let's modify the styles to work with our nav links. So our nav links are going to use this 800, which what's using our 800, our foreground muted. So we're going to set the color to be our foreground muted. And there's not going to be an underline. And in this case, it's okay because it's not mixed in with paragraph text. Everything in the menu is a link. And that will be sufficient right now. We're going to need to do hover effects and stuff. And I just like to do that later. I just want to get to building. And same thing, we might need to do something with this arrow, but I'll modify it later. The important part is that we're going to have this token on all of these links, so any modifications later will be easy to make. So that's a second link. And then we've got link with icon. And we could just set our nav link, because this is a nav link right here. It's just in the footer. We could set this to be display inline flex. Everything will go left align and then give it that gap of extra small. And that way, I'm just going to duplicate this and show that if we want to bring in this icon, let's copy this SVG and add an HTML embed, rename it to icon, and paste this in, fix automatically, set the width and the height to 100%, and then find any current color or fills and set to current color. And we are going to create a new token and call this link icon. We already have one for button icon, and maybe we want to combine them because we're about to do something very similar here. We're going to make sure we're on our token, not local, display inline flex, and or this really could be any style. I just chose inline flex. And then we're going to do the 1 and 1. Even though these are the same styles now, I might want to do hover effects that are different for links than buttons later. So I'm going to keep 2 different tokens and maybe move it around later. Okay, so now we can see that this is-link nav can have an icon and it'll work with and without, just like we did with buttons before. Cool. Now let's look back here and see, do we have all of the links covered? We don't have that link up here. I think I'll just change that later. I don't really like this top menu. I think it's a bit overkill for a single landing page, but we'll see what we do later. I can't overemphasize how important it is to do this prep work. I know it's a little bit potentially boring right now, and I'm going to want to jump into building soon, but let's continue building out some components like a card. So each one of these sections has a default item. I'm just going to Command D to duplicate it so I can modify this one, and we're going to call it card. And in here, I'm going to add a box, and I'm going to rename it to card. And let's look at our landing page here and see what we have. So this to me is the classic card. It has a border. It's got we can call this like the card header, the card body, and the card footer. We have, those aren't cards. These can be considered cards too. So this could be the card body, the card header, and this one won't have a footer. These are also cards, but a different variation. These are testimonials maybe, or how they impact the different roles of people using it. These are tabs. So we're going to build these out where you click on each one and the image is going to change down here. But the fundamental building block of this is a card. We've got that card header, card body, border, and we'll change it because it's going to need to be a little bit different. Okay, so I'm going to build either one of 2 things here. One, the most like classic or common implementation of the card, which is this one. Or I'm going to build some base part of a card that's like the same between them all. So we've got a border, we've got padding, and let's see, we've got some border padding. I'm going to build just like the common card. So like this one right here, this is what we're going to build. And then for the other ones, we'll create little variants to tackle them. Okay, so for our card, we're going to create a box for the header, body, and footer. So add box. I'm just going to duplicate twice, and then we'll go header, and then arrow or enter arrow down, Command E, body, enter arrow down, and then Command E, footer. In the header, we want to have the option to add an icon, and we'll rename this to be icon, and then a title, heading rather. And we're going to go over to settings and assume that it's going to be an H3. Normally you would have, the entire page is an H1, that section is going to be an H2, and then the children, which are typically going to be the cards, are an H3. And in the body, we're going to add a paragraph. And in the footer, I guess we'll add a link. And let's give it our link token. Now, this is why I like to just make the link be the base, like the one that works in just rich text or just anywhere on the page, because you're often going to add a link and then add the link token. I don't want to have to say like is link nav or whatever, because you're only going to build the nav once and then, pretty much leave it alone. Okay, so for the card itself, let's create a token and call it card. I'm going to go uppercase for this. I guess I haven't talked about casing yet. Lowercase are for, and this is just like the naming preferences in Craft. Lowercase are for components or, tokens that are not really semantic, but more utility. So if I head over to the Craft documentation, we can see a utility token. We've got this lowercase hyphenated instead of spaces, used for layout and styling purposes without conveying any inherent meaning about the content it contains. So it's a kind of gray area definition, because you can say, well, link was lowercase, but link does tell you what it contains. It contains a link. But semantic, let's just look at this here, conveys meaning and context about the content it contains. So card, pricing table, whereas utility is more like container, button, margin auto. So I guess the way to think about these is the semantic does convey its meaning, and it's more of a like fully built component. It's got multiple things in there typically. It's not something that you just throw on a box and call it a day. Like, it takes usually a little bit more building. That was honestly kind of a rough definition, but maybe as we build here, it'll make more sense. But a card, we're going to make this capitalized. And we're going to now call the children typically by first naming whatever's in the parent, so we can discover it. So if I'm just coming to this site and I want to see what options I have, I can see, okay, we have card header, you know, right here in the autocomplete. And the same thing goes for the links for discoverability. So, you know, if I have a link, and I could say, or the is prefix is, now I can see all the variations I have for link. Is link nav is the only one. So these naming conventions help other people and yourself when you come back to the site and go, what tokens do I have? Okay, so we want card header and card body. And I don't even know what styles I'm applying to these now, but I know my card is just going to be all over the place. And so I just want these tokens to be there. So if I ever do want to change the body, I don't need to go and add that token to 1,000 different places. And in the header, I'm just going to do card icon right now. I typically don't say like card header icon. Or actually, in this case, I could, because it does belong to the card header icon. It's just a matter of personal preference, I guess. So we've got the icon, and this is feeling a little bit redundant right now. So there's a bit of a red flag in my head saying, why are we setting display inline flex to every icon and setting it to be 1M? We might be changing this in the future. And the card header, I'm going to set this to be inline flex, so always, or it could be flex to, and the flex is going to give me the axis, so I can do the gap, and we'll just say extra small for now. And let's just give it a default icon so I have something to design. Always do, this just like fixes any HTML. I think there's some standard way of doing it in the browser that's not in Figma, or I'm honestly not quite sure. Width height 100%, and then any current colors or fills, I keep saying that, current color. I might have missed one, or maybe it's just all in one. We'll figure it out. Okay, that is going to be good enough for the header right now. The body, the important part is we have the tokens there, so after I replicate this 50 times, I can always make changes. And for the card itself, we're going to display flex. We're going to set it to be a column because we want it stacked by default. And I'm going to set a gap to be small. And right now I'm going to do space between, so it's going to force everything like to the outside and the middle. We might want to change that in the future. And then let's add our spacing. So our padding, I'm going to do dash, dash, dash. I'm going to do fluid sizing. So fluid sizing is really cool because it adapts to the screen size. So on bigger screens, the padding is going to be bigger, and on smaller screens, it's going to be smaller. And this is one, I feel like it just makes sense because you have more room, so why not display more? And two, when we go to do mobile optimizations later, we won't have as much to do because all of these are automatically adapting. So we don't need to drop down to the mobile breakpoint and say, let's reduce our card spacing. It's already done. And let's try Fluid 2. And this is a keyboard shortcut. It might change over time, but if I hold Shift, you see how all of the padding highlights. I'm going to do Shift Enter and then just Enter again, and it's going to change the value to be on all sides. Okay, let's set a border. Border, we have that foreground border color. Width, I'm going to do border size. So I'm always trying to use variables for any of these inputs. I don't know if it's 1 or 2 pixels. I think it's 1. Let's see here. Yeah, 1. And we've got a radius. Oops. Okay, I think it's looking good enough for right now. Let's create variations for this. So we've got our card, and then we've got this card. What is this section? It's like a card benefit, we'll say. So I've been doing it like, I'm going to duplicate this first. So I've been doing it where the token is going to be a variant. So is card benefit. That way we keep all of the base default styles and then do modifications. You could just get rid of card and say this is like our, just call it like a benefit. If the styles are close enough to one another, I like to do the variant, so is card benefit, but maybe it's a matter of personal preference. And these, we're going to set them to be a row. They just don't really have a footer, so I'm going to just get rid of that. And in the header, they don't have text. It's just the icon. And in the body, I guess we have a little bit of a heading. So in the body, I'm going to add a heading. And again, I'm going to assume this is an H3. I could have just moved that other one over here. But for the token, I'm going to call this, or I'm going to use maybe my heading 4. So just for styling purposes, it's going to bring it down, but it truly is going to be an H3. And then for my body, I haven't done this yet because I guess I haven't noticed, but I want to have some flex gap here. I want to control this. Although actually there's a default style right now. And if I inspect this, I can see orange is margin. So browsers set default styles, including on all of the headers, or headings rather. So you can see on each heading token, the default has these removed. The default in Craft, if I get rid of this, you'll see that there's a browser style here. Now on headings, we apply our heading token to every single heading. On paragraphs, we're not going to add a token to every single paragraph. This is just, it's a little bit redundant. And for the most part, these just inherit all of the styles we set on global root, because headings override anything, or heading token overrides, anything we've done in the global root. Links will override anything, but because we don't have any tokens on paragraph, our global root is essentially the styles for the paragraph, but we can't change the individual margin on like this element from the global root. Global root says font size 16 pixels, paragraph inherits that, but we can't do that for margin. So instead of creating a token on every single paragraph, I'm going to go to, down at the bottom, there's this page wrapper. We'll get into this later, but in the nav, there's this global styles. I'm going to unhide it. And in here, I'm going to do some custom CSS and do paragraph margin 0. Okay, so, and I'm going to put a little comment here by doing a command / and it'll automatically put the proper syntax and say remove margin from all paragraphs, so we don't need to use a token on every one. Okay, now we can see this paragraph has removed the margin. Now, just be forewarned here that the style panel doesn't pull in what's happening in custom CSS. Like it's not looking at that and updating the values. So you will still see the browser defaults here, but just take mental note of that. Okay, and then the body, we want a little bit of a gap. So to do gap, I'm going to do flex, and then we'll do our gap extra small. I typically try to stay away from margin. It's better to go to the parent and set gap. It's a more modern way of doing things. And it's better because now if I add, a bunch of different paragraphs, I don't need to set a margin on each one. The parent controls it, and I can change the gap, right from the parent. Okay, so card benefit. What are our styles here? We've got a background. Okay, so we have our first gradient that we've run into. I didn't see any of these before. I'm going to copy the CSS out of here. Again, there's probably a way better way to do this, but I'm not a Figma pro here. And I can see that there's linear gradient right here. And I'm going to go to my file and then just do gradient 1. And I know this is a thing because I've used open props, but if we go to open props, we can see that they have all of these default gradients 1 through 30. And I'm just going to override it and call it gradient 1. We could create semantic variables for these like we did with colors. So we say this is blue 2, but foreground accent is blue 6 or whatever. I'm not going to for gradients. I might change my tune on this later, especially if we reuse gradients a lot, then I might want to alias them. But for right now, I'm just going to copy this, head up to my global root, paste it in, and it'll update the gradients are already in here. You can see gradients 1 through 30 here. Okay. And my isCard benefit, we're going to plus a gradient, and then down in the code field, I'm going to do gradient 1. And we haven't seen anything yet because it is like a white gradient. So what was that blue background? Primary 600. So just for this guy, I'm going to switch over to local just so I can see what's happening here. And this is our background accent. So now we can see our gradient is doing that. And then for our border, it is dark overlay element. What is this? It's white at 20%. I'm going to see if we have a different color we can use. So let me just see in the blues, this blue 4 is more or less, I think, white at 20%. it's just easier to reference an existing variable. It's more maintainable. And the color of isCardBenefit is not going to be inherited. We're going to set it right here. We're going to say it's our foreground secondary, is it? And then the body is muted, or not the body, but the paragraph. I don't love this. I feel like this just makes it a little bit more annoying with tokens, but card benefit paragraph. And here I'm going to apply, this is probably another, 70% white. Let me just see if I have a token before, or a variable. This should just be my blue 2. Cool. All right, I think that's, oh, we got a background here. Background for the card header, and we'll say is card header benefit. Background, try blue 5, and then we need to add padding. And I could hold shift to begin with, and now when I enter my padding, I'm just going to do size here. On smaller stuff, I don't like to do fluid as much. I just like to do like an arbitrary size, and I'm going to hold, or I'm going to do, let's try 6, and then option enter, and then enter again, and it'll do just top and bottom. And this needs to have a radius. So let's do radius. We were doing 3 before, so we want to go smaller because we're inside of it. You want your corners to be, get smaller as you go further inside. And this is where I don't love the is card benefit modifications. We may have wanted to do a token for just card benefit because the styles for this one are so different from the original, but I don't know. I still kind of like having like the variants because they're just easy to switch from a card to a card variant. Is card benefit icon, and let's make this 2 rems or 2 ems. All right, we can always tweak these later, but that's good enough for now. Actually, our spacing is a little bit, whatever. I said let's tweak it later. Let's tweak it later. And all right, there was another card here. This is going to be pretty similar to our original card. So I'm going to duplicate that, and we'll say is card. I don't know what exactly these were. Oh yeah, they are testimonials. Don't take our word for it. I don't really like that title. And here we are going to apply that. Is card testimonial. And what modifications do we need to make? It's tall, so it's got a lot of padding up top. It's still got that padding all around, but it looks like, how do we want to do this? Is card testimonial. We'll say, what do we want to do? Fluid 5, fluid 6, kind of an interesting design. And we're not going to do a card header. We're just going to do the body and the footer. Let's put some more text in here. And that's going to be align center, is card body, testimonial. Again, I might change my tune on this. I might say, let's just do a testimonial token and, not keep doing all these modifiers. But, oh, actually, we don't even need to do this yet. I'm going to delete that because it's just text align center. So let's go up to the token we have, is card testimonial, and do text align center. And then for the footer, we have an image, a name, and a position. So let's add our image, and then I'm just gonna use text blocks instead of paragraphs because it's just a small block of text. And we'll do name, and then duplicate, and then position. Just good to name some of these often so it's just not text, and you can see in the navigator what they are. And I don't need a link. Okay, in our card footer, we haven't had any styles for this yet. I'm gonna modify the base one because it's not going to really matter for this. Watch if I do flex and stack it, if the original one's fine. And let's do a gap of actually extra small. Extra small, I typically think of like icons next to buttons or 2 texts that are very close to each other. And then small would be the next level up. So the card body here, or the card itself, is separating, the body from the footer. And then we'll get into medium and large later. All right, let's grab an image. Let's export this. Just grab a bigger one. And then head over to settings, choose source. And we're uploading our first image. Cool. Where did I just download that to? That is a good question. Oh, I think I downloaded the whole section. There we go. Okay, now we've got that PNG. Upload this. I don't know where that just went. Weird. Where'd it go? Okay, we could actually just drag this. Okay, let's select that. It's going to put in a width and height. This is actually a fine width and height. If it's like super big, we're going to want to lower it for image optimization purposes. And we'll just say picture of client. And then in our footer, let's see what else we can do. Can we go center? No, because that'll mess up the original one. So we'll go, we'll just undo that. All right, I think we're going to need to create a new token here just for that modification. Is card footer testimonial. And then we're going to set that to be centered. And then here we have our testimonial name, and I'm not going to create one for position because it looks like it's just using the default styles. Downside of that is if later we wanted to change the styles, then we need to go to every testimonial and add that token. But there. Okay. And I want to see if we have that card icon token. It's called card header icon. But what if we make it bigger? Let's do size 7. Can we make it work for both of them? I'm always trying to figure out like ways to reduce the tokens. I mean, these are probably the same size too. So 32 pixels and 32. Okay, so instead of doing card header icon, we're just going to call it the card icon. And that will work for anywhere the icon's at in the card. We also need a radius on this. If I do round, is that going to mess up my other ones? No? Cool. Okay. I think that works. We'll just give it a little bit of sample text here just to see how it looks and works. And what else do we have? Oh, this is bold and dark. So we need to say testimonial quote, and it's going to be a bit bold. I think we'll go with medium and the foreground primary. We could dial it in a little bit more, but I'm thinking this is okay for now. We have the tokens if we want to modify it later. Okay, I know we're putting in so much work up front. I know, but it's going to be a breeze once we start building. We have 3 cards. Let's move on and let's do just like maybe one more thing before we start building. Even though we're not done, I just like to just get into building because it could be a bit mundane to keep doing this. We'll do accordions later. Let's just do these eyebrows. They're called eyebrows. We've got a icon, text, and some wrapper. So we're going to duplicate our default here and just call this and add a box and call it eyebrow. And add, was it a SVG? Yeah, SVG. So we could do an HTML embed, call that icon, and then add a text block. And we could just keep it text because it's pretty self-explanatory that it's the text of the eyebrow. And let's give this a token and call it eyebrow. I'm going lowercase for this because it's just such like a small reusable thing and it doesn't have a big structure. And let's get this in there. Copy as SVG, paste in here, fix automatically, and let the size, height, and color or fill be controlled by the style panel. And this is getting a bit redundant. We've got card icon, badge icon. Wasn't there something else? Link icon. Those are different sizes. I'm just trying to figure out if I combine all of these into a token or not. I'm going to say no right now because they're just very different and I may want to apply different styles to them. And if they're all the same, then I won't be able to just change eyebrow icon. We could maybe do icon and then is icon eyebrow or whatever, but the base styles aren't that unique. It's just like, okay, display, we don't even need to do that. Display, whatever, inline flex, and set the width to be the same, actually a different width, but we'll go here. And then for the eyebrow, we want that axis. So I'm going to go inline flex. We haven't really talked about the difference yet, but flex will typically span the wrapper, the width of the wrapper, and inline flex will kind of hug the contents if you're coming from a Figma world. And we're going to go centered, gap extra small. And we need a padding here. I think I'm just going to go absolute padding here instead of fluid just because it's a small item. And let's try size 2 on the right and left and size 4. I'm sorry, top and bottom, and then right and left, size 4. And then we need a border. We got that, and we've got that border color. we'll grab our border size and our radius. It's pretty round, so I guess it doesn't really matter. We'll just go with the big one. And there's a box shadow. We haven't done box shadows yet. Where is the box shadow? Oh, here. Let's see if I can grab the CSS. We've got this box shadow here. We have a bunch of different box shadows in OpenProps. Shadows, 6 of them. And they use a very intelligent system that involves, let's see here, a color format called HSL. And it allows you to change just like 1 or 2 values. So we've got shadow strength, shadow color, and then all of the shadows will adapt to just these 2 variables. I don't know. Let's see, what was that shadow color we have? 58, 114. We can try to use this. Sometimes it's just, there's a lot of different shadows on the site. 2 HSL. So we have 44, 58, 114. And it was at 5%. I'm going to try building this out. I honestly haven't used this all that much because the shadows typically do vary. It was 228, 44, and then 31. And it was 5%. Let's try using shadow 1 here by going to box shadows and in the code field, doing shadow 1. We're going to need something bigger. So we got shadow 5, maybe too big. Okay, shadow 3, I think will work. Okay, and the icon, I don't know if this was always accented, but let's just do foreground accent now. And we're good to go with the eyebrow. Okay, I hope you guys are hanging in there and appreciating seeing kind of behind the scenes, less structured and more just me like navigating this, making decisions as we go here, because this is how it's done. This is how I do it, at least. All right, next up, let's build. We're not done. There's still so many more things to build out, but let's switch over and just start actually going to the home page and building this out. And then whenever we create different components that we haven't added to our style guide, we're going to come back to our style guide and add them. So at the bottom of our style guide, whoops, there is this page wrapper. I'm going to copy that. This is my default page wrapper. Now, we always wrap everything in a page wrapper because if it looked like this, I can't copy the body. So in order to be able to easily move an entire page from one to another, we wrap everything in one common box called the page wrapper. That way I can copy this like we just did and move it around. In here, we have 2 slots, the nav and the footer. A slot, these will eventually turn into components depending on when you're viewing this video, but it allows you to reuse something across every page. So for example, if I just add a heading to here, to my nav, and I go back to my style guide and down to my nav here, we're going to see that heading I just added. So it's the same thing. It allows you to keep your navigation and your footer in sync, or anything else that you might be wanting to keep in sync. And we're not going to do the header and footer until later. Let's get the body going, or the main part. There's a section default in here. It has a section token, giving the padding to the top and bottom with fluid sizing, and the container giving a little bit of gutter on the right and left, again with fluid sizing and a max width here. Now, before I build out the hero, I'm just going to duplicate this so I can save that as my template and then modify the name here and call it section hero. It is craft guidelines to refer to sections with a prefix of section. So when a designer comes in here, you're able to see that this is where the section starts. And a section has the importance because it's like usually the outermost. It has, this token, but also if we go over to settings, which we could use the D shortcut, we see tag is set to section here. And this is semantic, which helps screen readers and search engines understand the layout of the site better. We, intelligent people, can see, and that was, comparing us to search engines, that this is a section, this is a section, but it's just easier for search engines when they say they can read explicitly that this is a section, or for screen readers, if they need help, if somebody needs help navigating a page, they can navigate it easier to say, like, go to the next section. Okay, section hero. Let's build this out. What do we have? We have a top part here that's got the badge, title, paragraph, and within there, we've got a button group with 2 buttons and then a video. Okay, so the outermost wrapper is basically our container. Then we need to have a top and bottom essentially. So we're going to add a box and I'm going to call this content and then this one video. We could name it top and bottom as well. And then in here, I'm going to say like this is the main, I guess. I kind of want to call it content again, but that might be a little bit redundant. And then we'll call this our buttons, but actually I'm going to delete that because in our style guide, we have this button group already. So a button group has a default token right here that just adds the spacing we want between, and this actually should be using this token or this CSS variable, the spacing we want between our buttons so we stay consistent. So I'm going to grab that, head back to home and paste that here. In the top here, we have our badge or our eyebrow rather, and I could build it out, but I'm just going to copy it from my custom down here. Copy that. And then we need to add a heading. We'll give this our heading 1 token and then our paragraph. And then let's head up to main and apply some styles. So we've got flex because we want this to be a column with gap of small, and we'll center align everything. And then on our content, we want to have this to be flex column and then a bigger gap. So we'll go medium, and then this will also be centered. And down here is our video. So on our container, I'm actually going to apply a default style to our container, and that's going to be flex stacked with a gap of medium. It seems like every container, so like this is a container, this box is going to separate, this from this, or right here, the header from the body, or from the content right there. Okay, and let's get some real content in there. So it starts to look like a site, and then we can modify this, if like the heading's wrapping oddly, or, right there, we can see it's text align left. We need to change that. For those that don't know, even though these have a token of button, they are links. Links navigate you to a page or a section on a page. Buttons are for interactions like submitting a form or opening a menu. So, and that's like the HTML default, Webstudio is not creating this. A link is for navigating to places and a button is for submitting forms or, opening and closing, interacting with things. We use a button token because the appearance is that of a button, but it's technically a link. I don't think I didn't mention that before, so just wanted to mention that. And our main, I'm going to set the text alignment up here, so that way I don't need to do text align on the heading and the paragraph. And this is a bit big. Everything's too wide here. So on the main, I'm also going to set, actually, I'm going to do it on the content here. So on the paragraph, max width. There are 3 variables for this. I'm going to type in content. We've got 20 CH, 45 CH, and 60 CH. CH is roughly the width of one character unit, and in print, there are optimized widths for readability. If you're having to go left to right way too long, like it's just hard to see the next line or whatever. And 60 is good for this wider text. For headings, we have similar constraints, but they're going to be a bit smaller in units just because the text is bigger. One width of a heading is just going to be bigger. There actually doesn't appear to be a need right here, so I'm just going to get rid of that. Okay, roughly that looks like what we've got right here, except our headings need to be dark. So I just realized we set the, and since I changed the container here, I just need to change this one to a row. Since we set our primary, global root typography color to muted, we need to manually change our headings here. So I'm going to go to each heading and say this is the foreground primary. I don't love that we set muted as the variable itself, on the global root, but I think that works for right now. So I'm just going over to each token, make sure that you're selecting token. If I were to just apply, whatever right here, it's only impacting local, not every token, every heading 5 token. So move over there and just copy and paste all these. Cool. Something else I didn't check to see was what's the default font size. It is 16 pixels. So, that's just the browser default. I am going to just put 16 here explicitly because even though it's the default, I just want to make sure that my design says it's 16 in case browser defaults change or something. Okay, head back over to home. Admire the section we just created here. Looking pretty good. I'll do fine tuning later. And we have this video. We also have a section down here that's kind of similar and a section down here that's similar. So we might want to create a token for this type of section. And I don't know what that's going to be yet until maybe we start building it. So for right now, I'm just going to apply everything to local, and we can always convert it to a token later. And I'm just going to say background accent radius 3, and we need some padding. We'll do, I don't know, fluid 3 right now, just roughly put this stuff together. And then we've got this background. Let's see, can I export that? Let's see what the preview is. Yes. And actually, if this is an SVG, let's try that because it might be lighter and we can actually compare font size or sizes of this right now. 9 kilobytes. I don't know why it's downloading in folders like that. I haven't, or zip files. I haven't seen that. And 31 kilobytes. So the SVG does win. 9 out of 10 times the SVG does win. I'm just going to drag it in there. And I think that background I set wasn't needed, but we're going to just add an image on top. Set it to be in the center. And yeah, the background doesn't do anything because the background color doesn't do anything because the background image carries these styles. And there was a button of sorts in here. This is a bit, I'm not really sure how I want to do this. Like, so we have our Vimeo in here. And so this is like a bit custom to click a button and then have the pop-up. So we might want to use a radix component. I'm not entirely sure. I'm just going to add a link right now and just put a token on here and align this centered and come back to it. It's a bit of a unique section. Let's continue on with the sections that we have better ideas for, like how to implement them. We've already created some of the things. All right, we've got this, our featured logos. We're going to learn how to use grid in here. So before I edit this, duplicate it, and then we'll call this logos. In here, we're going to have, it looked like a paragraph for the heading right there. And we'll set this to text align too. Okay, now we're going to add a box for the logos. We're going to name it logos. It's a craft guideline to name the parent of multiples, plural, so logos, and then the individual logo. And here we're going to call it featured logo. I'm not going to call it logo just so the incoming designer or myself doesn't confuse this with like our own logo in the navigation. And let's add an image. We actually probably don't even need the box, to be honest. We can, I think, just sometimes you may need a box for images, but let's see if we can do it without. Featured logo, and let's grab, oops. Okay, let's export these as SVGs, and we're going to upload all of them in one go. And I'm only starting with one because I want to get one dialed in just in case I do need to make changes like adding a wrapper around them. It doesn't look like there's a big order for these. I usually try to keep them in order, but for the video, I'm not going to match the design. Okay, and I'm just going to call this logo Ipsum logo. Good practice. Of course, always have alt text in there for screen readers and for search engines. And for our logo, I am going to set a max width of, what do we have here? They've got 187 and 48. 187, and I'm not going to do a max height. I try to only keep it to 1 unless if you have, there's always that one logo that's stacked and then you have to make modifications. And I'm also going to add a filter here. It's not going to do anything, but it take the color out of it. Oh, but never mind. We have, it looks like these have a custom color in them. So typically if if these weren't custom colored and they were just a bunch of logos, we would want to like usually remove the color from them. That way, if we upload one that has color in the future and we didn't manually update it, then it would strip it out. But these are already polished, so we'll keep it that way. And I am going to duplicate it now. That's 4. How many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then head up to logos. I'm going to show you this utility token called grid. We're going to type in grid. It comes with craft. And it has some default styles down here. Maybe when you're watching this in the future, we'll have a grid implementation in the UI that's not in advanced. But for right now, we're going to be in the advanced section. And always switch over, unless if you want to modify the defaults for grid, always switch over to local. And here for template columns, I'm going to enter how many columns I want by doing 1FR, however many times I am 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that'll set 5 columns. Alternatively, it can become a lot to type that in that many times. So you can do repeat 5, 1FR. And you see how this works is we're overriding whatever the default is for grid, which is just auto. So it's, no columns or just 1 column. And now we have the 5 right here. Now, a note on grid while we're here is that on 767, it's going to become flex. And this is by design because many times we create bento grids. And so we have there's actually none in this design, but we might say we want this card to span the 66% right here or between, 1 and 3. And by setting it to flex, it helps our mobile optimizations. It probably didn't become too clear unless if we were to have an example. So I apologize for that, but just be warned that at 767, it does change to flex. You can change this behavior, but 9 out of 10 times it's helpful. This is actually one of the times where it's probably not helpful, and we'll make modifications to it. Okay, we are good to go on this. I might create a smaller section padding later, but let's just kind of keep the flow going and move on to this section. This is going to be a unique one because we're going to work with Radix components and make these tabs here. So we're going to be able to click the different ones and have a different body rendered. This is something that I keep seeing. We've got a eyebrow, title, subtitle, and then sometimes buttons. But I think what I'm going to do is create a token for this and just call it header. I don't know if I'll apply it to this header or not. Maybe it is the same because it's the same here. That way, if I want to make changes to the alignment, spacing, or whatever on mobile, it'll be easy to impact all headers. Okay, so duplicate our template section, and then we're going to call this, I don't know what, are we on features? What actually is this section? No, that's going to be features. This is going to be, I don't know, benefits. And we have our header and then our tabs. So let's add a box and call this header, and then add another box and call it tabs. Or we can just, to stay with the same naming convention, header body, something like that. In header, we need to add basically what we have going on here. And I'm going to create a token and call this header. I'm going to go uppercase. I can go either way on this one. And we're going to clear out the styles on local because, oh, actually, no. Let's redo this. I'm going to delete this. We already have the styles we want right here. So I'm going to convert this to a token and call it header. Now it's remove the styles from local, put them in header. And now I'm going to go down here and give it my header. Cool. And then let's go into our style guide and just add this to our custom section. So we know, other people know it's here. We can make modifications to it in one go. And I'm just going to change that so it fits better here. Cool. All right. Let's put our content in here. And it looks like we have this stacked. The text isn't wrapping. Like this text is bigger. That's why I don't know if I'm going to create a heading token, header paragraph. Let's do it. So this is going to be, whoops, this should be a heading too. So let's just change that in our style guide. It's kind of a pain to be doing this, but it's worth it take the time to make modifications and keep your style guide up to date. It'll make your site more maintainable. It takes a little bit of discipline to just sit there and go back and do it. But again, it'll help you and it'll help other people. It'll reduce the time it takes to maintain your site, which if you're doing this for a living is super important. Okay, a heading is the title. A header is more of like the introductory part of it. And here I'm going to not use is, and I'm just going to say header heading. It's a really odd token name, but we're going to go with it. And the reason I'm going to do not a modification is because it's not depending on the heading to styles. It doesn't need them. It's not modifying them. It's just bringing its own to the table. And that's going to be a header size of, I don't know. This one looks the best, but I think only because the length of this text. So let's try 25, but also set the wrap style to be balanced. And that'll handle making it look balanced. You know, we have now we have a text that looks nice on top and bottom without having to manually set max widths. And I'm just going to go up here and see, it's going to mess it up. So I'm going to keep it off of there right now. And here we have a max width. And so let's just convert this to a token and say header body. And then here, let's go up to the top one, clear the styles and add this token. And then going over here, adding our header body, and I'm just going to get rid of those. You see it turns red because it knows that local is the most specific. So anything I change on local will override anything that's going on with tokens. And same thing with tokens. If I have a second token right here, it's whatever the later token has will take precedent over earlier tokens. All right, sorry about all the tooltips that keep coming up. We've actually fixed that and it's getting released any day now. And this is going to be our header heading. Okay, moving along. We need our button group. So I'm just going to copy it from up here and paste it here. And then we've got get a demo, research. And there's no icon, so we'll just delete that. And there is a bigger space from the top to the bottom here. If this is the only place on the homepage that we have those buttons in the heading, I am going to add margin. I typically don't use margin, but the other way around is I'd have to add 2 children to the header, and then it would make it a little bit more inconsistent for my header component. So in this case, I am just going to put a margin on top. You won't see me do this very often, but it's for right now just a one-off style change on the site. So it's going to be more maintainable for me to do it that way. And we have our tabs. This is going to be fun. It's fun to work with the Radix components because they're dynamic. So if we go to add and scroll down, we see we have all of these different components. Radix is not made by us. Radix is a set of components that are for React, but actually Webstudio builds React apps. And they're highly accessible. Like that's one of the big points about them is that all of these are accessible. So you can use your keyboard to navigate it and select stuff and move around. They're very, very accessible. So let's add tabs. Tabs are going to have the triggers and the content. If you have, the third trigger, the third one will trigger the third content. They just stay in order like that. And I'm going to start by removing all the styles because I typically don't like presets and I want to have complete control. I'm going to delete everything but the first one so we can duplicate it once we have it dialed in. Okay, now we have no defaults. On our tabs, I am going to create, we'll create a token for tabs. Actually, let's see here. This is a decision where I'm weighing, do we create tokens for all of this, even though it would appear right now, this is our only implementation of tabs, or do we just use local and then use tokens in the future if we were to ever want to replicate this? The answer is it depends. If it was my own site, I would create tokens because I know I'm going to use this again. I'm very likely to. In this site, I don't know, and it's only a landing page, so it just seems to add extra stuff to it. And it might make people question, well, if I change tabs, where else are they being used? I'm going to go without them right now. We can always change local and convert them to tokens later. Okay, so let's get to designing. We have our tabs. Between our tabs, trigger, and content, there's some space. So here I'm going to set this to flex, stack them, and give it a gap of small. And then for our tabs list, our trigger, we talked about using cards before. They're very much like cards. We've got the card header, the card body, and let's just go over to our style guide and copy this so it's easier. And in here, I'm going to drag it in and then move the internal parts out because the parent tab trigger is like the card wrapper. Okay. And we have header, body, no footer, header, body, no footer. But we are going to need something to show that you can hover over these and what the active one looks like. So that's going to need to be repeated. We're going to create a modifier and say is card tab trigger. And I am going to duplicate this now because what will happen is this one is active. And if we select the drop down here, even though it doesn't say component state active right now, by us manually triggering it, it is active because it's triggered on here. So we'll work on the states in just a second. I'm just going to go up to the parent here, flex, gap. I don't know how big of a gap, small, I guess works okay. And the default state of these tab triggers don't have a border. So I'm going to remove the border. Actually, I'm not going to remove it. I'm going to say it's transparent because this will actually just be easier if I show you. If we have no border here and on active, we have a border, it's going to cause a little shift. You see how the content inside shifts down a little bit? This is, that's what's happening. That's because it's going from no border and the border occupies space. So instead of the border going from 0 to 1, we're going to say it's going to go from transparent to color. Now there's no shift. It's just going from a invisible border to a visible border. And let's go to active. And on active, we want to set that border to be foreground accent. They're both active right now because this is technically the one that's active on the canvas and this is the one we manually triggered. And then we want to add a box shadow. I'm going to go to box shadows and enter that shadow 3 seemed to work well, but maybe we want to do something a little bit more. It looked like it was pretty strong. I think that's more like it. Shadow 4. And this is where that system is really nice because all of these shadows are using the base properties. I only need to set those 2 and all 5 of them, or however many there are automatically adapting to them. Okay, now we'll need to set animations and stuff, but for right now, I think that's okay. Let's do a hover effect too. So maybe hover shows just the border. Let's try that, but no box shadow. Or no, let's do a muted border. Foreground border. There we go. Let's see how that looks. Hover. I think that's nice. And I guess while we're at it, this is the first we've done with states like active and hover. We have to do those on links and buttons still, but while we're at it, let's just polish these off a little bit. So under transitions, we want to make this not choppy. Right now, it's just like an instant it goes there. We want it to be smooth. So to go from transparent to color, we're going to go to transitions and change the property to border. And in here, we have 2 variables that come in craft. The first one is duration default, and the second one is easing default. That way, if we ever want to change how long our transitions take site-wide, we go to the global root and change that value. Okay, so that's border. We also want to change box shadow. So on our box shadow, we've got our duration default and then our easing default. And now let's see what happens. First of all, that hover, see how the border comes in and out nicely, and then it grows with the box shadow very smoothly. Okay, that looks really nice. Now let's modify one more state actually, is focus visible. So this, like I was talking about with accessibility, if I just set the focus over here and then tab, you can see my buttons get focused and then this gets focused. I want to change what that outline is to be my own brand. And so I'm going to go to focus visible. There's a few different focuses. I'm not going to go over what they are, but we want focus visible. And here I'm going to set an outline. And then there are 3 properties we have variables for as a part of craft. The first one is focus color. The second one is focus width. And the third one is focus offset. That way we can stay consistent. So I also want this on my buttons, for example. Focus visible, and these are a part of Craft by default. I forgot about that. Now, our focus properties will stay consistent if we want to change them across the site. Okay, tab content. We have this rounded tab content, and I'm gonna call it tab content right now. I might reuse whatever we're doing here. I'm just not really sure what to call this. Like, how do we abstract that into a token name? We'll call this, I don't know, like box accent or something like that. The important part is we're reusing it. In the future, we can change the token and just rename it when a better name comes to mind. So we're actually going to call this box accent. And here I have this image so we can export it. Let's try an SVG. I must have something else selected because it keeps zipping them. And here I'm just going to go to local to override what that background is. And there's this default text in there, and you'll see it come visible once I drag something in. There it is. So now I can get rid of it if I want. And let's just add a default minimum height of these to be, I don't know, that. We could always change this in the future. And I'm going to duplicate the tab content, but for this one, the design didn't provide another image, so I'm just going to select what we had up in the hero. Oh, and I totally forgot. I misled us. So the problem is both of these are showing. They're showing because our tab content is set to display flex. Radix is trying to say toggle between display none and display block or something, and we're overriding that and saying display flex. So pretty much anytime we have these Radix contents, they're, you know, accordion content or sheet content, we want to use this internal box and apply our box wrapper and our styles here and leave the content alone. Here I need to update this. And for our second one, I'll copy that, put it down here, remove my styles here, and override this with that one we were using by the hero. Okay, now tab content is, it's hidden. It'll show once we click on it. So we can toggle between both of these and see this work. Moving along, we have 3 triggers, and I'm just going to add that third one. I'm not going to design the body just because I think that would be a little bit redundant. And I think this is good for now. We can start to see that our card headings are looking bad once we have too much text. So I'm going to go up to my card heading, or header rather, and set text align left. And part of the benefit of having all of your tokens in the style guide like this is now I can check to see, well, did I mess up any of my other cards by setting the left alignment there? I don't think so, but I did mess up this one when we changed the default heading color to that foreground, I believe. So this is my is card header, is card heading benefit, or no, what should I name this? It doesn't really depend on that first token, so we'll just call this benefit heading and set the foreground to secondary. Okay, just clean it up as we go here. I think this section is pretty good to go. We could just give it a little bit of real content so the site looks more polished. I always debate on how much time do I spend on a video doing that, but maybe just a little bit here. And often, this is the thing, it'll bring out issues with the design that you don't see when you're just using a little bit of text. So is card tab trigger, we want to, let's see here. I guess that's okay, but maybe we want to left align everything. And for the tab list, instead of using flex, which it's a little bit harder to control exactly, you know, the space for each child, I'm going to use grid, switch over to local, and do my 3 columns. And now all of them are exactly the same. You can't unflex, you can't set 33%. You have to do some math because you have to take into account the gap between the items. Okay, let's just make this a little bit more polished so we can show off what we've created later on. our card body is black, and I'm not sure. It looks like right here the style says initial. This may have been a default for tab triggers. So actually I'm going to not put it on card because it might be confusing of why is it there when we're looking at different cards. But here I can see, okay, if I remove this, you know, that's, you can see the impact. And I never put my heading 3 token here. Is it going to be too big? Probably. Let's use heading 4. And always going back here and updating it, because if I forget to do this, then I have to add that token 12 times or however many there are in one of the coming sections. Okay, preview. Looks pretty good. We don't have that 4th tab content, so I'm just going to duplicate it once more. Nothing special here. It's going to look the same, but there we go. Okay, what do we have next? Testimonials. So this section is going to be pretty easy because we already have it built. So it's like the more that we build, the easier it generally gets, because we're just reusing stuff. If we've made our tokens and the color variables and just our variables in general well enough, they're abstracted well enough, then we can apply them to enough things and keep everything looking good and doing it quickly. Testimonials is going to have our header, and then we're going to copy that because we already have it, and then our testimonials, and then each individual testimonial we already have two because we created it. So I'm going to go and find our header right here, bring that down to my container, and this one does not have the buttons. What did I just select? Okay, and let's put in our content. It doesn't have a badge either, no problem. So, or an eyebrow. I sometimes call it a badge. And then for our testimonials, let's go over to our style guide, head down to custom and grab a testimonial. And really, I should rename this here. It should be testimonial. So the naming convention in Craft is you know, for navigator items, you want to name it what it represents. So yes, it is a card, but in this case, it's something more specific than a card. It's a testimonial. And so it does not need to match your tokens, and nor should it. It would look a little bit weird if we had card testimonial here. This is just very clean to read. We've got section testimonials. We've got our container, our header, and our testimonial. Simple enough. And let's copy this or duplicate this. That's probably too many times, but we're going to do 1, 2, 3. This looks like it has a slider. I am not a fan of sliders. They add JavaScript to the site. If you really want one, head over to the marketplace and you've got this Swiper.js demo. I think it just adds unnecessary complexity and I don't know, issues. It's not terrible, but I stay away. All right, grid. How many do we want? We probably should use repeat, but sometimes it's just faster to do that. 4 of them, so we can get rid of 3. It's a little bit tight. Let's go 3. Testimonials are pretty good to go. I guess we have different content here, so could help make sure that one short or long testimonial isn't messing up the design. Okay, added the text, and testimonials are now good to go. Moving on to the next section. This is our benefits section, kind of again. We called the one up here benefits. I'm not going to worry about it because it's a template, and the actual content, once the template is implemented, can dictate what is in there. Okay, we're going to grab this box accent thing and put it in here, and we'll call this benefits. I don't think there is any local styles on here, but just in case, I'm going to clear it. And in benefits, we have our CTA, we can call it, and our benefits. You could call it left and right as well, but the problem with that is once it stacks, it's not technically left and right. There's been a debate about this in Craft on what we should do, and it's not a big deal on whatever we decide. So you can maybe even call this primary, secondary. The idea is we need to be able to split this into 2 columns. And in primary, we're going to have our heading, give that our heading 2, and switch over to local and set our color to be foreground secondary. And start your free trial. This is that 3rd button we just don't have. So we'll need to create a token for it because none of these look good on it. But for right now, I guess I'll just do that. And let's set a small gap here, everything to the left. And in secondary, we're going to have 3 cards. And it's actually not 2 even columns there, so we'll change that. This is where the time that we took before helps out so much. We'll rename this to benefit because it's just so plug and play now. Benefit, okay, we got 3 of those. And we need to stack these with a extra small gap. Pretty good. And for our parent, I'm going to try to get rid of grid and just do flex and see how this looks with a medium-sized gap maybe, and let the content dictate the column widths. I'm going to load up some of this content here. I have a feeling this section is going to fail accessibility. Maybe it's because of the colors I chose instead of following this to a T, but sometimes, you know, just the color guide that we're following needs to be tweaked a little bit, which is all good. We will do that. I'm going to change this. So the problem is these are set to space between right now. I'm just going to do it to the start, just in case that text doesn't take up the entire section. And this has a background we're not using yet. So let's export that. Yeah, they have this theme color overlay that is probably making it accessibility friendly. And that's what we're missing on ours. Let's see if this is the SVG. I can't really tell. I think that's just the middle part. I'm not entirely sure where this is at. So I guess they have a, okay, what we export it probably is the right thing. And let's change this background, upload. We're not going to be able to really see it yet because we need to have a background accent here. And I guess instead of benefits, what these are is a free trial or trial or something. Okay, let's add some, oh, the background's repeating. It looks a little weird right now. So this should be set to no repeat, and really the box accent default should be no repeat. Should we do cover? I think we should do cover. So it takes up the entire space. Okay, let's load in some content, see how it messes up our designs. What types of tweaks do we need to make? Set a minimum width on the right. We've got this, and then we know we can add an HTML embed, call it icon, call it our icon, throw it in the link. It's going to come after the text, and copy this. It's an SVG. You know the drill. Settings, paste, fix, 100%, 100%, current color in the fill field. And in this case, I want the current color to be white, so I'm just going to control that from here. Secondary. Actually, I'm not going to control it from there because once we create our button secondary, it looks like all of the text will be white, or tertiary rather. This is a linear gradient. We might already have this. Let's see what happens if I set a background gradient, and that was our gradient 1. Oh, we already have it. So it's basically a button with a different background. So we don't even need a token for that. I think because that's the only place, if we see it pop up in more places, we'll create a token for it. I think, how's our max width doing? Is it a little bit too small? Looks like the design has a max width of 1200. And we set a max width of 1024. So I click the label and I'm holding Option after I click it, and I can see what the variable translates to. So size large, we need to add a search feature here because sometimes it can take a little bit to find what we're looking for. Alternatively, I can set it as a variable and paste it in, which I like to do because for whatever reason, I like to have a copy of all the different changes so I can provide you guys as like a template creator. I can provide you with the changes I made. So it's, I don't know, more clear on like how it's deviated from the standard style guide. But I'm not perfect at doing this, and I just realized I forgot to add the box shadow changes I made to it. It's kind of an odd practice I have, so you know it's not something that we need to be doing. But okay, now it is. Wait, what did I just change it to? See, why am I talking while I'm typing? Was it 1200? 1204? Size large, 1204. We'll paste this in. It'll update that value. And now we have a little bit more room to work with. Looks better. Okay, next section. Duplicate. What do we have? Cards. This one should be relatively easy, though we do have this fade out at the bottom. This creates a little bit of complexity to it, but we'll figure it out. Header, cards, CTA of type secondary. Features, we've got our header, although I want to copy a header that has the badge like this one. And that button, it's not really going to be a button group, just the button itself, but we got a button and we've got our features. And then for our features, we're going to grab that card we created. This is just our default base card. It can be used for a lot of different things. One of them is features. And we have 3, 6, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're going to use our grid, switch over to local, and we want a 3-column. There we have it. We want everything in our container to be center aligned. We'll get rid of that and that. Let's swap over content. Oh, I realized that our card header doesn't actually contain the heading. It's just the icon. So I shouldn't have duplicated this 9 times. Okay, though. It wasn't until I was copying content in that I realized the body contains the heading. So it should look like that. And we'll make any updates as needed. Not entirely sure that these were actually links, but their color made me think it was a link, and we'll roll with it. We'll assume that we're creating pages that targets these audiences. So, you know, we have our marketing, sales, and operations page so they can learn about how our SaaS helps them from their specific perspective. Okay, I'll spend time later cleaning up the icons, but we need to add this overlay that fades it out into white to show that we have more applications. More applications. I'm going to do that not with the Figma design, but my own thing here. So if you've never worked with the position CSS property, you're going to learn now. A lot of properties in CSS are self-explanatory, like, you know, width and max width and colors and size. You type them in and you see what they do, or you already know what they do. But this position one is not self-explanatory. So I'll do my best to explain it. First, we need to add a box, and this is going to be called our overlay fade. And this box is going to go from a gradient of completely transparent to completely our primary background. So let's do that. I'm not going to use a gradient variable because this is the only place I'm using this in to my knowledge right now, but we can always, if I were to use this again, then I may want to either use a token or variable for it. And we're going to say this is a linear gradient, and we are developing a UI for gradient, so you don't have to know the syntax. And we're going to go to the bottom. So from top to bottom, that first color is going to be transparent. And the second color is going to be a variable of background primary. I think autocomplete may have messed me up. Okay, let's see if that works. I'm not a pro at writing the gradients, but we'll see. Now what we want to do is position this over this existing content. We actually don't want it to take up this space. We want it to overlay the other content. So by default, things are positioned static. And that's just, you know, how you add something, they take up the space that they're adding. And we need to change this to be position absolute. So if you change it to relative, you won't see any changes. It just allows you to move it around a little bit. And you can't do that in position static. If you change it to fixed, it'll stay in one spot of the screen. So if you want like a fixed navigation, that's how you would do it. And sticky is something kind of like fixed, but it's only temporarily fixed. Absolute takes it out of its place, like fixed and sticky, or just like fixed, I guess, and puts it wherever you want it, but it doesn't stay fixed. So as you scroll away, that element will also scroll away with it. But if we look at where this is at right now, it's up here. Why is it up here? It should find the nearest position relative. And I don't know that maybe I have it somewhere, but basically you want to go and set position relative to the parent that it's relative to. So this child is being positioned within this feature section. It's not being positioned within the entire body or the page wrapper or the section hero. It's this features section. We want to move it around within that space. Now what happens, actually, I'm going to remove that just to show you. If I say I want this all the way to the top, now we should see it. There it is, all the way at the top of the page. If I want it to the left, and if I put zeros right and left, it kind of acts as with 100%. And we can see it at the top. But now when I change features to relative, we say, hey, absolute. The absolute is going to say, okay, I'm going to keep going until I find something relative. If nothing is relative, then the body is the default. And as soon as I change it to be relative, we can see our overlay here. And we want to set a height to it. There might be a more intelligent way to do this than saying, okay, the card's height is about 250 pixels. I want it to be about half of that, I guess. The card's height will adapt though, and that's the thing where we may want this value to adapt. So I'm going to say height. What did I say? It should be like 125 pixels. And then instead of it being at the top, I actually want it to be at the bottom. So I'm going to hold Option. Whoops, I held Delete. I'm going to hold Option and click this value, or actually that'll do both sides. So I'm just going to reset the value like that. And now it's at the bottom. However, I want it to fade out to be like 100% faded out. So instead of doing to bottom, I'm going to specify this. We're going to say this is 0%. This is 100%. This is going to essentially have the same effect, but now I'm going to modify them. So we do want transparent to start at 0, but where do we want our full on blacked out or whited out overlay? 50%. Whoops. That's looking pretty good. Fades it out, fades it out. I'm happy with it. Now it starts at 0, and at 50% of the way through right here, it says we're switching from transparent to the just white. Okay. Hopefully you guys hung in there with me on that one. Sometimes position is a little bit difficult to explain. It's difficult to use as well. I personally stay away from it in most use cases. This one's not terrible because it's just very predictable. We're always putting it at the bottom, and there's no complicated math of trying to position it in, off-centered right here. It's just always at the bottom. So whenever I'm using for the absolute, that is like a green flag for maintainability. After position absolute, we have just one more page section, and then we're going to do the header and footer. Here we go. This section is our last one, so I'm not going to duplicate it. I'm just going to name it FAQs. And in here, we have a left and right, not perfect columns, but, like as in 50%. So this is going to be our header, which actually I should copy our existing header. And we'll need to make some local overrides to this because the styles are centered. And in this case, we want our flex container to be a row, and we want to drive the things in them space between to the outside. It won't really make a difference once we have a lot of content in there. And our header, we have FAQ, a little redundant to have that in this, but it looks nice, which is why it was probably done in the design. And in the parent here on the header, we're on local. We don't want to change every header, and we want it to be left aligned rather. And same thing with the text alignment. And here we've got that flex. Okay, let's add our accordion. This is another Radix component, those highly accessible and dynamic components. Let's build this out by doing what we did with tabs. I'm getting rid of everything except one because I like to just start with my own way of doing it, except there's one area that we need to keep in here. There's these CSS variables that handle open closed. So it rotates that icon. So I'm going to clear out everything and except for that, because I'm going to want to keep that, and I could add it back, but it's just already there for me. So why not? Reset manually here, keeping that variable, and it's probably got hover state and our open state. We'll get into that what's happening there under the hood. And I don't want a text block. I want a header because why not? And this header is going to be an H3 or heading. I keep saying that. We'll keep that icon. The one rem is fine. I'm going to get rid of the transition because I want to add that ourselves. And I'm going to clear this out. Okay. The defaults are nice and they're good for a lot of use cases, but I'm just highly particular and I want full control over what I'm doing in these designs. So we have our item header. Let's kind of start, I guess, with the internal parts of it and work our way out. The item header, we want to display flex. Oh, I'm sorry. The item trigger right here. We want to display flex so the icon is on the same line and force them apart from one another and make sure everything is in the middle. Again, I apologize for all of the tooltips. I know it's a little visually distracting, but the fix is probably already out by the time you're watching this video. And let's just add a little bit of content so I can get a better picture. So we can, if you're building this with me. Item trigger, we need to convert this to a token and call this accordion trigger. We're going uppercase for these, and I try to name them based on what they're already named here. So accordion trigger item is just a little redundant. And here I want these to be left aligned. There are these browser defaults for these. I'm just going to do inherit and browser default for border. Let's just set that to nothing right now. No border. And in here, we just have a border left, but it doesn't take up like the full, maybe it does take up the full height. Let's see what happens here on the trigger. When I add a border, we're going to do our foreground accent and give it a border size of 2 and a radius. I think it was a bit rounded. I don't know how much this is going to do anything though on, let's switch over to, so we could modify, oh, not that one. For border width, we're going to say no top, no right, whoops, 0, and no bottom. And the radius is going to mess us up, so don't do that. And we want a padding for the left. We can, I don't know. I guess because the header's fluid size, I'll put a fluid padding here. Oops. We'll do 2. It is rounded though. I think we need a separate item to make that work because it basically needs to be like a box or a separator, but we could try box and say line. And I'm just going to do local right now to see if this is a direction I want to go. We'll do, even though the width, I was thinking of using border sizes here, but I might want this to be fluid. So we'll go fluid 1, height. Let's do not 100%. I don't think. Let's try 90%. And then let's give it a background so we can see what we're working with of that background accent. I don't know if we can do percent heights on this. Do we need to set it to flex? Not necessarily. Let's try 1 rem. Let's just see what happens here. I don't know how we can make this relative. When we're setting, I know there's a trick for this, but when we're setting a arbitrary height to a box that doesn't have anything, it's a little bit tricky to work with. Let me just try to see if a separator behaves differently. And we actually have a token for this. I'm going to switch over to local though, and let's see what happens if I do height 100%. Even if we do display inline flex, no, not working. Let me just try up here to do stretch. No, okay, so it's pretty much behaving the same. All right, so we'll do this line, I guess. We'll try this, and move that. Okay, and I need to put a gap up here. We'll do small, and this is where the radius, I think this is why we're doing it this way, is so it's rounded. So we'll give it a big radius, and then on the trigger, no border, option, 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 and then no border here. And then we'll call this the, whoops, convert accordion line. All right, not bad. A little bit odd, I think. Sometimes if there's a design element like that, I just don't want to implement it because it adds some complexity to the site, but we've done it. Heading, we'll use the defaults there, and then this is the accordion icon or accordion, yeah, icon. And let's try 1M, and no, let's do, oh, it's not going to change until I do the height as well. So we can kind of see, we'll do size 7, make sure the height's restricted too. Okay, took us a little bit to play with that, but I believe we've got it to be where we want to. The header seems okay. The content, this is what I was talking about before. We want to add our content to a wrapper and not directly, or our styles, not directly on this content wrapper right here. And I'm going to create a token accordion content and just name this wrapper. One of the rules of craft is to not leave boxes as their plain name as box and to always rename them. There are other instances or components like that too, that it's just better for maintainability to rename some of the more the flexible, like box. Like it could be so many different things and it's hard to understand what its purpose is without a custom name or digging into the CSS, which we're trying to avoid. Okay, and now we need a little bit of padding between the two, or separation between the two. I'm going to try doing an accordion item here. It might mess up my animation that we're going to look at together. I'm excited to show you how to easily and quickly animate radix components. And let's do a gap of small. Okay, so now we can see that, well, one, the content is forcing the width larger, so we need to set some sort of like max width on these. And two, it's just happening too quickly. We need a transition between the states. Accordion, let's give this to be a width of 100%. And because I've already used tokens for the internal parts, I might as well just name this accordion. And this is the problem because it is taking up 100%. It's just 100% is different when the content changes. So there's two different ways we can approach this. Well, there's probably a lot of different ways, but we can have the content always take up the most amount of space it can, but as you can see there is overflow. So I am going to change this container to be a grid and set the grid columns to be, let's give the first one or the second one more, 1.5. Is that a good ratio between the two? I think so. Now let's talk about two things. This arrow is transitioning too quickly, and the content is just snaps in and snaps out. There's no animation. Let's address the arrow. The arrow, by the way, this is a cool feature of CSS variables. Check the link below in the description for a tutorial on how to hover or interact with a parent and modify the children. What's happening here is a variable on accordion trigger called accordion trigger icon translate is set to 0 degrees. And then on open, it's set to 180 degrees. This value of the variable is used down here. So there is a rotate here, and it's using that variable defined on the parent. So all the child knows is I'm inheriting some parent variable value, and the parent is modifying it from one state of 0 degrees to 180 degrees. And it's a cool way to modify the children based on what you're doing with the parent. But let's add a transition here. It actually came with one, but I got rid of it because I want to use our custom CSS variables of duration default and easing default. So we're not using some random variable here or value. And now we can see that the arrow is translating nicely. Okay, how do we animate this content coming in and out? The answer is Animotion, a third party made by me, not by Webstudio, but just it's a very lightweight animation library that knows radix components, and it knows how to do just very simple animations on the site. So I'm going to go to the marketplace Animotion and insert the code, and it should be here. And I'm just going to drag the Animotion slot out and get rid of this confirmation message. This has some code, there's docs, I'll have them linked below. It uses our variables already, our duration default, our easing default, whatever. We don't need to get into that. Let's head down to our accordion and on item content. And I'll show you here that if we go to, I think it's dub.sh/Annie, it'll pull up the docs for this. There are radix components, and it tells you the radix component, what instance you want to apply the animation on. So for accordion, we want to use item content, and the one we're going to use is expand, primarily intended for radix components with open close states like accordions. Item content, we go over here, we type in a new attribute, data-Annie, and we're going to say expand. Let's try it out. Now it expands nicely. And we can animate a whole bunch of things. So just on here, I'm going to show you how to do one more. There's a tutorial on this, but I want to animate these. Let's do data-Annie dash children. This is a little bit out of the scope of this tutorial, but true. So we're saying animate all of the children here, and data dash Annie. We want a progress animation here, and we're going to do fade. Now, if we're living right, these cards will fade in as we scroll them into view. Pretty nice. Okay, whole other tutorial on that. Again, link will be below in description for that. Let's duplicate our item and see how it looks with different content. Ooh, there is a jump. See how that little jump at the end? That's because of that gap. So we can't have a gap here. I'll keep the accordion item there just in case we want to add something in the future, but accordion content wrapper is where we should add it. And we're going to add some padding to the top. Accordion content, size 1.5 rems. Now let's try it out. Smooth, very smooth. Now we need to separate the items on accordion, flex, column, gap, small, beautiful. Okay, and our accordion section appears to be finished. We may want to tweak it. Oh, except this icon right here. I forgot to do two things. The container here needs to be 100%. It needs to be, here's the problem. If we do start, the icon won't be at the end, but we should be able to go to the icon and self-align it. No, we can't because it's, one thing we want to do though is this. It'll always make sure the icon is the same width and it won't shrink. Like this one's bigger than this one because the content's forcing it to shrink. So we'll just say, nope, don't allow it to shrink or grow. And we need this to be at the end. We could do a margin left auto, a little bit of a hacky way to do it. Or we could have wrapped the first two things in a box. So this one's driven to the right. All right, let's see how that looks. I think that's good to go. So let's just take a look at what we've done so far because we've come a long way. Of course, there's still tweaks that we're going to want to make. It's not mobile responsive and we still need to do a nav and footer, but we've got this put together. It's looking really good. And it's taken us a bit of time, but it's becoming quicker and quicker to work within the site. We've even added animations. So next we need to work on our footer and our navigation, our header, and keep fine tuning the site from there. Well, I hope you guys are enjoying this video and following along. We have two more sections we need to build, if you can consider them sections, which is going to be our navigation at the top and our footer. Let's knock out the easy one first, and that's going to be the footer. Oops. Okay, on our footer, we already have a slot down here for it. And the footer, most importantly, has the footer tag, and the nav will have a nav tag. Let's look at what we're building. We've got, pretty simple, 3 sections, 3 areas. We've got the logo, the links, and the legal. So let's add that in our container. Our first box, we'll add 3, duplicate them, the logo, links, and legal. In the logo, we need to add probably a link and then an image within there. So a link is a link is a link. You don't need a, some people say, well, I want to link an image, and they go to the right and they're trying to find the link setting. Some platforms offer that. What's happening under the hood is that there's a link wrapped around it. There's no way to link to another page, realistically speaking, without, wrapping it in a link. So we can drop whatever we want in here. If we want to link an image, a header, an accordion, that would be a little ridiculous, but that's how it's done. The link, we have the image, and let's export this logo. We'll do an SVG. Actually, I don't even know if we need, you don't even need to be in the assets tab, and you can just grab a link over here. Okay, logo. And we'll link this to our homepage. And then to the right of the link is a separator. And we have a default token in Craft called separator. The logo container is going to be flex because we want them to be on a row in the middle and with a gap small. And this is a very light line. Let's see what color variable we have. And we may actually want to set the default separator now. We haven't done that yet. We have it set to background secondary. I'm going to set it to foreground border. Foreground and background, there's no technical difference between them. They just represent colors. And this is actually, I try to stay away from this. I'm using a foreground and a background field, it's not ideal just because the semantics don't line up. But I'm going to break my rule once because it is kind of like a border. The separator is very much like a border. And that's my justification for breaking my rule. Okay, now we've got our links. We've got 4 columns, so we're going to have a grid for our links. So we're going to use our grid token that comes with Craft. Head down to the bottom, and I can do repeat for, what do we want to repeat? 1FR. You get a lot more complex with grid. I'm just keeping it very simple, and this works. Next, we're going to have a link group. And in the link group, we're going to give this a token and call it a link group. And maybe we want to say it's a footer link group. I don't know if we want to reuse this later. We can rename it. And in here, we're going to have a heading. It's not, I usually don't make these headings. I think once you're in the footer, they don't represent like the page content as much. So I'm going to do a text block and give it a heading 4 token. I think that'll be sufficient. And we can even rename this as heading, or more accurately, title. And in here, we need different separation between title and the links. So we'll call this links again. I sometimes try to avoid this too, where we've got links. It's a little bit confusing. So we can call this maybe areas, because it's not a section, but I don't know. That will work for me. And then each link, we're going to have a link, and then it is link nav. I am going to do something that I might change my mind on later. I'm not going to use a token for these because it's very straightforward. It's just an extra small spacing between, or gap between them. The link group, I could do the same thing. I don't know. I probably should make a token for the inner links right here because I'm going to be repeating it. So, okay, I've already changed my mind. Part of my hesitation is just like, what do I call it? Because I already have link group. So link group, I don't know, link group links. Maybe I call one like a link stack. It's not ideal. We can always change them. And is that how I want it? We haven't done hover animations yet for links. We really do need to do that. And then these last ones are going to have that icon. So we'll add the HTML embed, add that link icon token, and let's drop in some of these. Okay, I'm not going to do all of them right now. We are already having a very long video here. I hope that many of you appreciate the depth of it, but I'm also, I don't know, hesitant that it's such a long video. Definitely the longest YouTube video I've ever made. So we'll just add the titles here, and let's do our legal. We've got essentially a left and a right, or we can say copyright and policies. Add a text block, and we've got 3 links down here. Looks like these are the same link styles as our nav, so we'll just keep that the same. Oh, did I not? I'll come back later and clean these up to be the right text. But for right now, I'm more concerned about the styles. So we'll say flex, gap small, and then the parent needs to be flex with space around, or between rather. And I'm going to put a gap here, even though it's not going to show, but once the screen collapses, those 2 sections will come together. So we'll just try small. And okay. Oh, I probably want a little bit of padding. Section might be too much. Let's see what happens though if I do section here. Yeah, it's going to be too much. So that's okay. We'll just do fluid 3 maybe. Option enter, top and bottom. Oh, and we have a line here as well. And this actually is going to be a border. So we're going to do border, color, foreground border. That's why I used it on separator. And then we're going to do a border size of 1, and then switch over, and then 0 out everything but the top. And we need spacing here. The spacing here should be the spacing at the bottom. So we have this fluid 3. I'm going to create a variable because I need to use it in 2 separate spots. Here, right, this footer, and then the child too. So I'm going to, on the footer, create a variable. So it's only available on the footer. We'll call this footer spacing. I think it was fluid 3. And then here, I'm going to do footer spacing. Oops. And then down here, I can say margin or padding top, footer spacing. And that way it's consistent from here to here, here to here, and then the top as well. So CSS variables are not just for global, they're really helpful for doing little local things too. And maybe I should have used a CSS variable over here because it's just one value. I'm just saying, what is my gap for the link group? But we'll keep it this way right now. Okay, footer is good to go. Of course, we don't have hover animations yet. And let's get to that in the next section here when we do the navigation. So for the navigation, let's start with the easy stuff. Swap out the logo we already made. We may want to drop this into a slot so it's the same on the header and footer. I am going to load this eager. That's the default for the navigation. The things above the fold, which is what's visible in the viewport when you load this site. It's good to have things load eager so the images come in right away. It's going to help with your performance scores versus the images down here will only load in once they're scrolled into view. Okay, now I need a look at this. First, let's add some spacing. It happens to be, I think, the same one as the footer, but I don't think that they need to be the same. So I'm not going to use a variable for them. And then on the right side, we have, left side. So we've got a left and right. So CTA and like main navigation. So we'll call this main, and then this one CTA. The main is going to contain our logo, and then a new component we haven't used yet called navigation menu. This is going to contain dropdowns. And then our CTA is going to contain a button group. I'm actually just going to copy that from the, and do it that way. The nav, flex, row, drive everything apart, space between, and keep everything centered, aligned. Same thing with the main navigation, flex, centered, rows default, but I'm just going to select it to be explicit. Let's give it a gap of small, and we already have a gap up here. Okay, so right now we have a working menu, but let's tweak it. I'm going to show you some cool improvements we can make to it. First of all, let's copy whatever we got going on here. We got features, and then these buttons need to be reversed. We got get a demo and start your free trial. Are they the same? No, get a demo. Oops, get a demo. Okay, now it's a little bit more in line. Oh, we need our pricing link. I think I duplicated the wrong one. Okay. These accessible link wrappers, I think we need to remove them from the component. I could be wrong, but I don't believe they actually do anything. I think they used to do something, but they're accessible without them. So they sometimes just add clutter and get in the way for what I'm trying to do. Also, these buttons change to button type of button, not submit. They're not submit buttons. Let's check our accordion triggers too. I don't know if these are, no, we're good there. Let me check my item trigger. There's technically no button rendered there. Okay, cool. Okay, next up, let's add tokens to all of these. I'm going to clear the styles, do link is link nav, clear styles. The defaults are very nice. So I just want to reiterate that there are a lot of things you can do with the defaults, and a lot of times you have to rebuild the very things that are set to the default, but I prefer again to have full control. Okay, we're seeing something happen here. These are technically, did I add it to the wrong one here? Button, why is that one different than, oh, I didn't clear the styles. All right, these are technically buttons, like actual buttons, not just we're styling to look like buttons. So on our defaults, the browser defaults, they're injecting some styles. Light gray is one of them. I want it to be transparent. Border is one of them. I don't want a border. Is there anything else? I think inherit does the same thing. I just think font size 100% is a little weird. And, oh, there's padding. 0, I'm gonna do shift enter again to zero it out. Okay, let's add some gap. Now, intuition might say, I wanna add a gap right here. Actually, I didn't clear these out. Display flex. I'm not going to do a gap, but I'm going to set the list style type to be none. Intuition will say, add the gap there. But the problem with that gap, and I'll do it just to show you here, is that when you're hovering over one of these, to get to the next one, you have to go over no man's land and you're going to have this. If you go fast enough, it's okay, but I want to avoid that. So we're going to add the spacing directly to the, I don't know, is nav link. This is in the bottom too, so it's going to impact all of the, my hesitation comes from, I don't love the idea of doing another modifier is link nav main. It just is confusing to me. I'm going to try an approach, and on the navigation menu, I'm going to say nav link spacing and do 1.5 rems. We'll try this. This is going to help me avoid a token, and we can try, oh, I don't know. This is a little bit odd. I might change my mind on this later. Nav link spacing on the right side of this button, and we don't need one on the right. So now it's impossible to go from one to the other without the menu going away. Let's see how this works. Okay, next up, we have this drop-down menu. The drop-down menu, this is a bit of a learning curve because let me go to like Stripe's website, for example. I think they use the same component. You see how when you switch from one link to the next, this big box doesn't go away. It just adapts to whatever's in there. So what's happening, and ours is the same thing. This component's the same. What's happening is you have the menu right here, and you even have these menu contents are your drop downs. This is like the inner part of the menu, and that gets rendered in the viewport container. There's only one of these, and this viewport, menu viewport, is what adapts, and it's like the parent to what's up here. Now, it doesn't seem logical because these are siblings of each other, so how does one get into the other? But there's JavaScript going on that will move the menu content here into the menu viewport. So when I'm designing the background and the padding and the border, I'll use the menu viewport. In here, I'm going to set a background to be my primary. Our border is going to be our foreground border. We're just going to change these to use variables, border size 1 and radius 3. Now, unfortunately, we can't exactly see it right now, and we're not going to see it until we open the menu. So we're just kind of guessing until we tweak it. We'll do shadow 3. And let's just see how we're looking right now. Okay, it's choppy. It goes from that to this width and height. You can see that that box is choppy. So on the menu viewport, we are going to set a transition, 2 of them actually. One of them is going to be the width, and we're just going to grab that duration default from our variables, and same thing with the easing default. And then we need one for the height too. So when the height changes, it's not going to go from old height to new height instantly. It's going to have this duration. See how it expands and contracts? Perfect. And I'm actually, you can see I'm messing up. I'm getting off of the buttons right now because they're too small. So I'm going to change this. And this is the downside of using this variable right here. I don't have a token, unless if I use my isNavLink token, which maybe I'll do. We'll try that. So now there's a little bit more of leeway. I can hover over higher and lower to it. It's not much, and I might want to change it more. Another thing, the menu just snaps in. Boom, it's there. I want an animation. Well, we already have Animotion. So the thing that is animating is the menu viewport. This is the thing, that one thing that's coming in and out. So we're going to go over to settings, data-ani, and you have options here. I'm going to try zoom. See how this looks. The first time, for whatever reason, oh, there's actually a glitch with this, and we need to change something. What is that something? I might need to reference another site to see. Menu viewport, it has something to do with overflow. Let's try getting rid of this overflow. I think that's good, but we may need to set the overflow here because if the content is really big, let's try overflow hidden. Yeah, so that way, if like this is really large and you switch over to the other one, it doesn't snap out of the viewport. Okay, there we go. Now we have a very nice menu. You can use different animation settings for this and design this out. This is going to be outside the scope of the tutorial just because this design here doesn't have what they look like. But it's just, you know, like designing anything else. You're going to go to each menu content and change these how you wish. Okay, I've been putting it off for too long. Let's do link animations. Now that I have a clearer picture of all the links, it might help me and help us understand what should the animations be. And actually, this, if I recall correctly, has it. Here we go. So menu. Oh, we also need to make the menu have animations for when it's hovered down. And I'll show you a trick to do that. Default, hover, active. Let's just change our default links on our style guide. Well, this already has an underline. So what do we do when we hover over it? How do we indicate there's some interaction? See here, what do the other ones do? They change color. So I guess it would be nice to keep it consistent and change color. We'll go to foreground muted. And this way, all I need is a color transition, and this will help my base link, and it'll also help my variants. Now I got a little, that is link nav. Well, this is just going to the same color, so I need to change it. So hover, the color is going to be accent. It's going to be underlined as well. I don't know if you can, I don't think you can translate text decoration. I think it's just in or out. This is if we do a custom one, I believe. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to reset this so it goes back to inheriting my link. And now I need to set, let's go back here and look, see how it's doing. So when this is open, I'm no longer hovering over it, but I want to keep those styles active. I have some CSS I'll share with you to make this happen. In my global CSS, I just went to another site and I copied it. I'm going to put a comment here. We need to move this to the UI. We just need to add a state. But for right now, we're going to do it this way. And I'm going to say show parent dropdown link hover styles when dropdown is active. And in here, I'll put this below. I hope I remember everything I'm saying. I'll put below. I need to add nav-dropdown-parent to each of the dropdowns as a class. So I'm going to go over to settings, add it as a class to the button. Go to the button, add it as a class. Head back up here. And this is saying when the button is open, go to the dropdown parent, make sure that the icon stays 180 degrees transformed. These are the values from my previous site. I don't want a box shadow. I just want to emulate those values I just had. So what do we want? The color, and we can access our CSS variables here. I want the color to be my foreground accent, and I want text decoration underline. Now if we're living right, as I stay over these, and actually I don't want the text decoration underline. I think we should only reserve that for hover, but we'll keep the color. See how the icon stays rotated and the color stays blue. Perfect. Okay. Oh, and we didn't do the buttons yet, but we're going to make this really simple. And on button, hover, let's set an opacity. Go down here and do like 0.8, and then do a transition on opacity using that duration default and that easing default. Subtle, it works. Simple enough. I do want to set a max width on this heading while I'm here. Let's try that. We might just need to set a manual one, or let's just set text balance. Much better. It's subtle, but it's much better. Okay, the navigation, let's revisit that. I think it's good. I'm not going to build this top one right now. It's just redundant, and this video is already insanely long. But I think we have all of the tools necessary at this point to just create a section and add more links to it. Okay, next, let's do mobile. Now, this might sound like an incredibly large task. The only big thing is going to be adding a mobile menu, because we're not going to optimize this one to be mobile. We're just going to hide it and add a separate one. But I'm going to show you how close we are to mobile being done besides the navigation. Let's switch one breakpoint at a time. 991. I'm actually just going to hide the navigation altogether right now because it might be causing some overflow issues. And right now, something is causing this overflow left to right, which is bad. If you're ever scrolling on your phone, it's so annoying to see that. And we got to figure out what it is. And I maybe have some theories, but I'm going to start by hiding stuff. If I hide my main, my overflow is gone. I can't scroll left and right anymore. So I know it's somewhere in here. Hero, nope. Logos, yep. Now I can't scroll left and right. Let's add the hero back. It looks good. So something with my logos. We need to give these permission to wrap. And actually, I don't know, there's maybe a reason I did grid. I'm going to try not to use grid, and let's see what happens if I do flex, give them the ability to wrap and align them in the center. Downside of this is I don't have that perfect grid I was looking for. So I'm going to back up, bring back the grid, and then drop down to this breakpoint. And now let's say, okay, it doesn't need to be perfect anymore. We'll do it this way. There's probably a way to do that in grid, but I think this is just pretty simple. Okay, that's it. Everything else should be pretty good here. This is a little bit off actually. I think that right side is too small. So optionally, we can start wrapping things if we want. Or maybe I want to use grid here actually. I'm going to put a grid here, go back up to desktop and just do it this way and say we want this to be 1 FR, 2, these are just relative units by the way. So this is basically like 1/3. Oh wait, the other one's bigger. Okay, and then on 991, maybe I want to change it so they are even. So this is 2 equal columns now. And that's fine. Now, when I go to 767, we would expect there to be a lot of overflow. And actually, there's none. I would expect there to be some because I already know the trick that's at play, but there's none. The reason for that is because all grids drop down to flex at this point, like this. This was a grid, and now it's flex. There's really no point to have a grid at this point because you're not going to be fitting 3 different cards next to each other. There might be some, but in those cases, you just go back and override it and say, no, actually, I do want this to be a grid still. And that might be the case for these logos. Why are they not? I think they're a little bit too big. Let's just make sure that they have the permission to, they do. Featured logo. Let's reduce the size at this screen size until, okay, something's clearly wrong because I would expect them to wrap by now. Oh, it's a column instead of a row. Okay, now they look good. Other than that, it's pretty good. Of course, there's tweaks we can make, and I realize that we never did this play button up here for the video. I think that might involve some custom JavaScript, so I'm going to stay away from that, probably entirely for this video. Maybe when I release this template, I'll change it. And let's go over to 479. Maybe for our button group, we want to change this to be, or our buttons actually, to be 100%. Sometimes on mobile, it just makes more sense and it looks better for them to be 100%. And look at this, like our card padding is really small because it's using the Fluid 2. Our section padding has reduced because it's using Fluid 6. So it's automatically responding. And we can see this too. If I grow this, it's a little bit hard to see actually because it changes. But we have got a bigger padding here. And then when I go down to my 479, it's actually a smaller padding. Everything's stacked. Everything looks pretty good. This actually, we need to stack it. Maybe we want to do it here. Typically around 767, I start to look at just stacking things and not trying to fit things side by side. But, you know, some stuff, it can still work. Mobile optimizations are done. Next, we just need to build the mobile menu. As you may have recalled, we hid navigation because it's just going to, we're not optimizing this, so it's just going to mess everything up right now. But at 767, get rid of it. Instead of flex, display none. Now it's gone. And let's look at what we want for mobile. I think we have a design here. It looks like they make some tweaks like hiding some of the logos. It's not a bad idea. So maybe here we just start setting some of these to display none. So it's not as many. You know, these are the types of small tweaks that you can make to improve mobile. But yeah, there's some more minor things that we can do here, but I think we're just going to keep rolling with this. And it looks like there's just the logo, but there should be here. Oh, they keep the buttons on tablet. There's no trigger, but we need to add a trigger. So on 767, we're going up to the nav, or to this nav right here, and we're going to add what's called a sheet. The sheet is another Radix component that has this behavior, an overlay. And I actually regret making this display none because I still want to keep some things from it, like the logo, but not the navigation menu. So let's set that to display none. And this, let's just get rid of it. So no navigation, and we're going to name this and say menu desktop. My naming convention, I always just use desktop mobile if it's just 2, even though technically this might be tablet. It's just kind of like big screen, little screen. And then we'll add that to my nav. And now it'll automatically be on the right side. The styles, button, clear them. I'm setting my own because we have a button. And we just need to say, we can maybe try using our button icon. No, too small. Just something custom for right here. Width, let's try size 5. And the padding is just going to mess us up. So let's do size 1 and then shift enter. Okay. We can make this a little bit bigger. We got to account for the padding there. And next, we've got the hamburger menu. That works for me. Sheet overlay. I'm going to clear these styles and we want to bring it back and do, I think position fixed actually. Or let's look at the design. It just kind of expands a bit. So the sheet overlay, it's down here. I'm going to set this to position relative and do the sheet content as fixed maybe. Let's see how this looks. Or absolute rather. Well, no, I'm going to do fixed. So I'm going to get rid of this because when it's open, it has a different close button. So I can't rely on the same button. Sheet overlay, fixed, top, left, right. So it takes up everything. It's this little trick. And for the height, for the bottom, I'm not going to do that. I guess it's not taking up everything. So I need to manually set a width. Oh no, it's the inner contents. So sheet overlay is sheet content. I'm going to clear them out and I'm going to see what else is in here. Close button, content. Set this to flex. We'll probably need some sort of gap in there. So we'll just put that in there for right now. I'm going to set the width to be 100%. And let's see if a height works right here. Height's usually tricky. Sometimes I just play with these to figure out. Once we get content in there, there will be height. And let's set a background of, I guess the sheet overlay is so it like fades out other stuff on the page. So this actually should be, this is where getting rid of the defaults might not be a great idea. Let's give it a background and I'm just going to reduce this down and just give it some overlay maybe, or white would probably work better. And let's blur it too. So let's add a backdrop filter, blur, and just blur it. So the user's not trying to click onto the screen. It's apparent that we've got this sheet content. And let's add our logo. I am going to put our logo, I think, into a slot. Where is it here? So we get to reuse it. Okay, sizing, there it is to fill up the screen. And for our close button, I'm also going to just put the same styles. So let's go back to our closed menu and convert this to a token is button mobile nav. That way it looks the same. Button is button mobile nav. And I guess we need an override here. What color is it by default? Background blue. Oh, there's local styles. Okay. Sheet content. Let's add some padding. I'm not going to worry about fluid sizing now just because it's such a small screen that I don't really need to adapt at this point. And now we can see, open it, close it, open it, close it. I could dial it in a little bit more too, so that this spacing right here is the same. And it's actually using container, I believe, or fluid size 3. So I could create a CSS variable for this, and maybe I want to. And I know I said I wasn't going to use fluid size here, but I am just to stay consistent with the other nav, just so when this opens, it's like the same. There's a little jump. I don't know what's below it, maybe a border. Now it's the same. Cool. And for our links, here's what we can do. We can add, oh, and when we go back up to desktop, our mobile menu showing. So let's go up to desktop and say sheet trigger button, just display none. And then when we go back down to 767, we want that there. So display block, inline flex, they're all going to perform the same for this. And now we need to build out that mobile menu. Let's see how far we'll take this in the video, just because it's going to be, it's basically going to be an accordion. You can either use collapsibles or accordions here. So a collapsible is like an accordion, but it's not necessarily a part of the parent. So you can interact with multiple and they don't know about each other. There's probably other differences too, but we already have an accordion designed. So I'm going to go down here and see if we can repurpose this accordion by pasting it in here. So I'm going in and out of the menu, by the way, by clicking in the navigator onto a component that has it within it. And we have an accordion. I'm going to get rid of all but one item. And this one item, let's change the heading. Let's get rid of the line. Don't need it. And the heading is just going to be text. And the content will be like links. There'll just be link 1, link 2, link 3. So we'll do something like this. Accordion content. I think we could just set the global default to stacked. It's not going to affect the bottom one at all. And we'll set a gap in there too, because if we add more than one paragraph, we're going to want some gap between them. We can just go down and verify that these behave the same. They do. And now we have, where's this size 5 coming from? Oh, it's to separate the top there. Okay. Well, this even works pretty well as is. So we've got this, and now we've got the links below it. Set a bigger gap here. Whoops. I need to set this to a column and then set our gap to be bigger. What is in here? Oh, whoops. I meant to impact navigation. Column, gap, medium. And on the accordion, what we could do, so one isn't automatically open, is head over to settings, and that default value, just get rid of it. And now it won't be open by default. At this point, we're sitting pretty. The mobile menu hasn't been completed yet, but at this point, I don't think we are learning anything new. We're just taking more time to design stuff out. And, you know, I guess there's some tweaking I need to do here. I didn't see this on desktop until now. So before let's make sure this breakpoint looks good for sure. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, my mobile nav is still triggered. That's why my clicks aren't working. So I just got to click out of my mobile nav. So it's just here at 991. I'm going to hide this button, see if that gives me enough space. And let's just try changing some text, start free trial, just make it a little bit more maintainable than having to hide stuff. We might still have to hide some stuff here, or we can reduce that nav padding we set. Was that up here? Nav spacing, let's bring it down to a 3, 2. I don't know if I want to go below 3. All right, we're just going to do free trial. Keep things simple instead of having to remove something. And now we should be good. All right, as I was saying, I think we're sitting pretty here. The page looks really nice. It's very maintainable. We've created tokens, we've created CSS variables, we've created these accordions and all of that. And there's honestly not that many tokens. And, you know, there's no problem in using tokens, but just generally, I try to keep things as slim as possible to make the site be able to adapt and change without feeling like there is just so much weight to it and so much learning curve that somebody else coming into the platform would struggle to understand what's going on. Of course, there are some advanced things in here, though. So, you know, I definitely skew towards maintainability and scalability over easiness to understand. But anything that is odd or that you need to pass information on to the next person, there's a notes section here. And this notes section is where you can put that information. So an incoming person, designer, developer, inheritor of the site can read some of the nuances of the site. Now, speaking of this notes section, I want to take a stab at making the site dark. We currently have it in light mode, but the design has a dark option here. And if we did things right, this is actually going to be very simple. If we didn't, there might be some more tuning, and I don't know if this will make it in the video. But let's go back to this Sublime text file. I realized I probably shouldn't have started doing this in Sublime Text. It made it just seem a little bit more like coding and difficult. We can easily go up to the global root. I don't know if I made this apparent at the beginning. It's been a long video. And modify everything here. So maybe that's what I'll do this time is modify everything here. So let's just flip these. Let's see. No, but I want to make it cool. If I do it, if I paste it in, then I think there will be like a cool factor to it. So scratch what I just said. Homepage. Default color is neutral 0. Oh, but they flipped them on us. So I guess I just have to map this. This would probably be grade 10, I think. Okay, so we're just going to map. All we're doing right now is I'm going to change these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different colors. Foreground, primary. Oh, that's the bill. Fill, background primary. What's the color? The lightest of them, gray 0. So foreground primary is gray 0. What's muted? Oh, they use slightly different color scheme. That's okay. We'll just kind of guess here. Muted is going to be this color. Accent, staying the same, I think. Secondary is probably the inverse, so white, or maybe it's dark. We'll just paste these in and see where they go. Muted. This is BEC. Oh, this is the one we were just looking at. I think I did. Oh, grade 4 already did it. Border. 4F. Is there anything close to that here? Let's just try gray 8. Okay, I'm not entirely sure everything I just did there, but let's copy this. Head over to the template. Let's go to the homepage for a potentially wow factor, or I might be overplaying this because I messed it up a little bit. I'm going to paste these in, and they're just going to overwrite everything right here. So I could have just went in here and changed each one. Not bad. Actually, this is really good. This is really good. This is the one I was stuck on. What is that? Let me check in a second. Everything is like good to go. So just by, we just need a different logo because the logo itself is white. And maybe invert the button. So there's little tweaks here. The button, change the foreground, or foreground secondary was the same problem right here. I'm not really sure. Let's just try gray 0, foreground secondary, and we can totally do it here just to preview it. Gray 0. And we've achieved dark mode by changing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different CSS variables. Pretty crazy. And I'm just going to undo. And there we go. We're back to light mode. Well done. Now that this site is good to go, we're going to publish it by going up to the publish dialog and clicking publish. Currently, this process takes 45 seconds, give or take, because what's happening is the builder and your project are two separate things. So it's not like a WordPress site or some other platforms where the builder and your final site are all in one. By doing this decoupling, it makes your website more secure because it's living in this own isolated place, more performant because it doesn't have all of the builder code with it. It's just a very streamlined application. And it's an application. So we're exporting, we're building a JavaScript application, and it's getting deployed to over 320 Cloudflare servers around the world. So literally your website is milliseconds away from any user that will go to your website. And the speed of light is the biggest limitation for performance. I mean, you can do all the performance optimizations there are, but you are bottlenecked by how long it takes for the website to travel from the server to your computer. And by deploying it to all those servers, it fixes that significantly. So now that it's deployed, we need to do a Lighthouse test. We're going to test performance, accessibility, best practices, and SEO. In Chrome, I right-clicked, inspect, and then switched to Lighthouse. And now I'm actually just going to scroll through it once because images generate the very first time the website loads, and then they're cached. Now we're going to analyze the performance, the best practices, accessibility, and SEO on desktop. There's usually a handful of things I need to fix, and I'm actually doing this. I should be doing this in incognito because I've got Chrome extensions, but let's just tackle these real quick. They're not always going to be the same. I mean, depending on the things that you do on your site, you're going to have different issues, but on home, I just need to put a meta description. I'm not going to take too much time to do this. I'm just going to, do this to satisfy the Lighthouse test. Okay, that is the only issue for SEO. Best practices, good to go. Accessibility, background and foreground colors don't have sufficient contrast. So the only issue is the buttons. This accent color is unfortunately not dark enough. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Go over to the site, grab this background color, and I'm going to go to color.review, paste in my background, and then I think the foreground is just white. So I'm just going to drag this up there. And it works for headlines, just not text. Headlines are bigger, so there's more leniency with that. So what can we do? Well, maybe I'm going to go over here, and that's blue 6. Let's try blue 7 and type this in the background. And now it passes for text. It's going to change the theme a little bit, but it's necessary for accessibility. So we're going to go over here and change just our foreground accent to be, not the direct color, but blue. And let's see how that works after we rerun the test. I just had to rerun the test because I accidentally closed out, but I haven't republished the site yet. So the numbers are just slightly different from different tests, but heading elements, I failed to keep them in order. I forget to do this sometimes. There is a Chrome extension called Heading Map. I just clicked it. It's just outside of what I'm recording, but it's called headings map, and it'll just highlight the order. So I've totally copy pasted error, and every one of my headers in my style guide is unfortunately an H1. So let's just change the source first, because this was probably the main issue. Header should be the H2, and let's just go on the home page and fix those. So here's a heading, H2. It's not going to change the style because our tokens are applied to them, but it will change the hierarchy of the page, and this will help search engines and screen readers navigate it. H2s should be contained within H1s, and there should only be one H1 on the page. Okay, frequently asked questions, that those are threes. Okay, so that should be good. And I keep closing out of it, but we're going to have an issue on mobile too, so let's just run this. I know I forgot to put the ARIA label on buttons. Accessibility. Buttons do not have accessible names. I don't know why that button's so big, but okay, so here is the problem. Let's go over to mobile. This, when we look at it, we know hamburger menu, open mobile, but screen readers, if you can't see it, you don't know what's going on there. So for this ARIA label here, I'm just going to say open mobile menu. And then we have another one. They're not flagging it because it can't be seen right now, but it's there, and that's the close button. So I'm going to go over here and say, ARIA label. This one wasn't pre-added, so just do that, paste that in, or close mobile menu. Okay, now I'm going to publish, and I don't know if there was anything for performance I could do. This time I'm going to run it in a incognito window, so my Chrome extensions aren't adding their own scripts and skewing the data. All right, I believe it has rechecked here. Let's do a republish. Let's do mobile. And there's more tweaking we can do. I realize this button is rendering a little bit odd, and in the font sizes we never touched, but all in all, I'm pretty happy with it. So SEO best practices, accessibility, whether it's mobile or desktop, there should really be no excuse to have 100s on all of those. Performance is really good for mobile. 87 is not bad at all. There are defer off-screen images. I guess what I've got going on down here is potentially taking a bit to load. Oh, that background is 0.5 MB. And background images aren't automatically optimized in Webstudio. So potentially, I think it was this one right here. This one, I should maybe make an image component and set it to position absolute and behind everything. I'm good with 87 on mobile. That is a bigger score or better score than you'll get in most places. And let's check desktop. 95. I really wanted to see 100 here. So what am I doing wrong? Part of the reason is we do have some extra JavaScript loading with the Animotion. It's a very small library, but sometimes it can make a difference between a few points. And I'm just going to refresh now that I'm on the network tab. Just take a look at, yeah, this thing is 0.5 MB. So you can see the largest thing loading is this one image. It's 0.5 MB. Everything else is 1/10 of a megabyte and down. So I am going to fix that. This image, let's go back to Figma and find this image. Was it here? Let's try exporting it as a PNG. And I'm just going to do 2x so it's a little bit bigger and see what we're working with. 366. Now it is a background image, so it's not going to go through the pipeline of Webstudio's image compression and stuff. So I'm going to manually compress it on tiny PNG and convert it actually to WebP. And now it's only 97 kilobytes. So let's re-upload this image at an absolute fraction of what it is right now. And let's republish. I know I said I might make it position absolute to move it around that way, so it does go through the optimization pipeline. I'm going to try this, manually compressing it and seeing what performance impact it makes. It's done publishing. Let's open this back up, and I'm wanting perfect scores. I should only really test performance at this point because we already know the other ones are good. Oh, 96. I was expecting better. Let me make sure that we have, yeah, it's a lot smaller now. And let's just try on mobile. And while this is running, I'm going to do one more thing just to show you the pros and cons of adding Animotion, adding any extra scripts to your site. And really, I have this in the the top here in the head or in the nav, I'm wondering if I should first try dropping this down lower. All right, now it's the last thing that loads on the page. It shouldn't impact the animations at all. We're good to go. Publish. So we got a 90 on mobile this time, but let's see what happens after I've moved Anymotion down to the bottom of the page. All right, we got to beat a 96 on performance. That's where we were at last. If you're in the 90s, you're doing amazing. Okay, we're at 100. It's unnecessary to take it this far, but you get fireworks, so hey. All right, I don't know why I was putting it up at the top to begin with. Let's check mobile. We've got a 90. That's really good for mobile. I mean, that's great for desktop. So mobile, that's beyond awesome. And there we have it. A SaaS landing page built on Webstudio using these advanced features like CSS variables, tokens, animations, dynamic components. It was all done using best practices and, well, 99%. There's a couple of areas I probably could have improved on, but the consistency, maintainability, and scalability of the website is at an all-time high. Somebody else is going to be able to go into the website, or you're going to be able to go in there and be able to modify the website while staying consistent with the rest of it, adding on new things without breaking things, and being able to just maintain it over the long run without taking a significant amount of time to make changes or update something. Well, if you've watched all the way till the end, props to you. This has been a very long video, but I hope it's also been equally as helpful for you to learn how to navigate Webstudio and build professional websites. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.